Ani bojo, wawashkash kwa dijnakas makwa dodem, we kwamkong ni wanabdabing, bojo, bonjour, tonse, sego, kwekwe. I'd like to welcome everybody and just share a few words of thanksgiving and gratitude for all of your participation today. So in our language, I'm an Anishinaabe Kwe from the Robinson Huron Treaty Territory. I come from Wikwamacong, which is located on Manitoulin Island, and also the First Nation of Wanabdabing, or what is called now the Wanapate First Nation. So in our Anishinaabe language, I would just like to share a few words of thanksgiving. Nahau. Ani bojo jemnido, ani bojo nokumis mishumis. Miigwech wenji enji, miigwech kore nibi, niaki noden. So in our language, I just gave thanks to all of our creation. Shkapmakwe in the language of Anishinaabe means Mother Earth. And I think it's quite timely that we recognize her as our first mother and all of the elements and all of the resources that she provides to us. And I believe it's fitting with our discussion today around circular economy. So I'd also like to just share a few words of acknowledgement of the lands that we are all residing on and where we're coming from to present and share some time with one another today. So I know as evolution has had it, there's several First Nations in what you now call Canada, but prior to this colonial policy and practice from our relationship with the Crown, prior to that, we had a very, respectful relationship where we felt a nation to nation relationship should be honored. And this is what formed treaties. And so here in Northern Ontario, we are amongst several treaties, the Robinson, Huron, and Superior treaties, the Treaty 3 and the Treaty 9. So I would just like to share a few words of understanding, and perhaps for those that have not had the opportunity to unlearn what we've been taught in Western education models, that we take the time and have the willingness to get educated in the true stories of what we now call Canada. And I believe it's every citizen's responsibility to take the time as we embrace all of the resources that our First Mother has provided to us, and recognizing that there is still constant inequities when it comes to the original peoples of these territories. Before we go any further, I would really like to acknowledge all of you for taking the time. As we get older, one of the teachings that we receive from our elders is the greatest gift to give is the gift of time. So we want to acknowledge all of the participants, the leadership, and all of the visitors that have come to hear the knowledge and wisdom that is being shared amongst our panelists today. Our thanksgiving for your gift of time to joining us. So I'd like to pass over the floor to my colleague, David Oswald, and just provide a few introductory notes for my co-moderator, which I'm very honored to be working alongside here this morning's event. David is a designer and an environmental scientist. He's the founder and president of DE Design and Environment Incorporated. He's also an associate professor in environmental science and management at Royal Roads University. His team at DE work on environmental mandates for international organizations, governments, companies, and NGOs around the world. And a significant part of their work relates to environmental assessment and data integration for sustainable development and the circular economy. I believe that in November of 2020, Mark, MP of Nickelbelt, had an opportunity to embrace David's speaking engagement at the Parla American 17th Plenary Assembly. And this is what brought us here today, founded on the root of that presentation, but more importantly, the significance and the critical responsibility it is for all of us to revisit what circular economy is and how it's affecting our human family, and more importantly, all of our relations in what we call our First Mother, Shkakmakwe. So Chimiigwech again for taking the time to allow me to share a few words of Thanksgiving. I look forward to being your co-moderator for this morning's events, and I'll pass it over to my dear friend, David. Nahau miigwech.
Thank you very much, Angela. Again, it's an honor and privilege to work with you on this. And thank you very much for those the introductory remarks and notes of Thanksgiving. So I'd just like to start with giving some thanks to all of you for attending. We know you're all busy and this is your valuable time. We hope this is going to be an event that you learn something from and can take away some valuable learnings. We'd also like to thank our sponsor, Glencore. We appreciate the support for this event. I'd also like to thank the co-hosts. So my company, DE, is one of the hosts, and the Northern Policy Institute, and Charles and his team are the other host for the event. We thank you very much, and Mark and his team for helping to mobilize this event. Specifically, I'd like to thank Kaylee, Rebecca and Anne from Mark's team, and Jordan from Charles's team, and Charles, of course. We'd also like to thank the panelists. We've got a great group of panelists that are going to be sharing their wisdom and their experience with us on this critical and important topic. And the youth will participate and giving their thoughts as well. So with that, I'd like to just kind of first ground the topic that we're going to be dealing with. This is probably familiar to some of you and less familiar to others. So as Angela had noted, this all started, at least this event came from an event with Parlaméricas. Parlaméricas, again, thank you very much as well for your support with this event as well, Alvaro and the team of interpreters. Just a note about housekeeping. We would also like to mention that we do have interpretation for this event. So if you would like to have French interpretation at the bottom right, there's a queue there for you to get the interpretation. As a matter of protocol, we will be having questions asked, but the way we're going to operate this due to time is we will go through the interventions of the panelists in the sequence of the agenda. And then if you could make note of your question as we go, and then we will open up the chat for your questions at the time. So roughly about quarter after 12. So that will be the time for you to pose your question. You can do it specifically to a panelist or just generally, and we will field those questions. If you could just mention your name and your organization when you post your question, that would be appreciated. With that, what is the circular economy? And this is the topic that we're going to talk about today. And the working definition that we are starting with is commonly referred to as from the Ellen MacArthur Foundation, which is an economy that gradually decouples economic activity from the consumption of finite resources and designing of waste out of the system. Yes, that's the fundamental definition, one of them anyway. And there's three principles. So first, to regenerate rather than degrade natural systems, to keep products and materials in use, and to design out waste and pollution. So those are the three operating principles of the circular economy. And it's not really a new topic per se. This has been around for a while, and but it's become increasingly important with the challenges we're currently facing as a global community with respect to the degradation of biodiversity, impacts of climate change, and the degradation of land. So we really need to make an effort to make our economic activity more environmentally sustainable, and that's what this is all about. Now, you may be familiar with environmental management. What's different, so things such as life cycle assessment and so forth for an individual organization, and what's different about the circular economy from those principles is we need to take a bit more of a macro view. So a bit more of either a very macro view, international or a national view, or in this case, a regional view. And in order to do that, there are certainly different perspectives that are required in order to take that perspective. We need to look at things rather than just a single organization, but the issues that translate across different stakeholder groups. So we have a series of panelists that are going to share their learnings with us. I would first, before introducing our panelists, I'd like to thank and recognize MP Mark Saray. He's the MP for Nickel Belt. He's the chair of the Canadian sector of Parlaméricas and the former parliamentary secretary of the Minister of Rural Economic Development. Mark's motion M106 passed in the House of Commons and helped develop Canada's first national senior strategy. Prior to politics, Mark worked in the telecom industry for over 15 years and has extensive experience working in the not-for-profit and disability sector. He's a proud Francophone and a Métis descended from his four grandparent familial lineages. As well, I'd like to thank and recognize and introduce Charles. So Charles Sirkwell is the founding president and CEO of the Northern Policy Institute and an independent think tank based in Northern Ontario, the NPI, and many of you are familiar with the NPI. And Charles has worked in the public, private, and not-for-profit sectors as a program manager, policy analyst, and senior administrator consultant entrepreneur. So without further ado, I'd like to introduce our panelists in the order in which they will be speaking. I'm very excited to hear their interventions, and I know you will appreciate them greatly. First, we're going to hear from Dr. Erin Henry, and Erin is the Senior Director of Natural Resources and Sustainable Growth at the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. And in this role, he's worked with Canada's leading resource companies to develop public policy on key issues that relate to resource development and climate policy. And specifically, over the last year, Erin has led the Canadian Chamber's work on advancing the circular economy and positioning the importance of the resource sector in Canada's economic recovery. So Erin has a doctorate in political economy and sociology. He has a position as an adjunct research professor at Carleton University, and his position as Senior Director of Natural Resources and Sustainable Growth at the Chamber. So we'll hear from Erin first. After that, we will hear from Dr. Gary Bota, and Gary is a medical doctor. He's a fellow of the Royal College of Physicians of Canada. He's the emergency medicine section chair of the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. He's the emergency medicine lead at Northern Ontario Health. He's also the chair of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment and the chair of the Climate and Health Task Group at the Northern Ontario School of Medicine. And he'll give a very interesting presentation on the health perspectives on the circular economy in Northern Ontario. Next, we will hear from Peter Xavier. Peter is the Vice President of Glencore's Sudbury Integrated Nickel Operations, consisting of an exploration group, 2 underground mines, a concentrator, smelter, and port facilities. Peter is also responsible for project investment, developing the Onaping Depth Mine, and Peter is currently chair of the board of the Ontario Mining Association. He is also on the board of governors of Laurentian University. He's also warden of Camp 22, which oversees the engineering oath and iron ring ceremony, and on the Kiwi Park Board. And we will then hear from, let's see here, Dr. John Gunn. So John is the Canada Research Chair in Stressed Aquatic Systems at Laurentian University, and he's the founding director and award-winning of the award-winning Valley Living with Lakes Center. It's a LEED Platinum building, a research center that specializes in research, restoration, ecology, and management of aquatic ecosystems impacted by industrial emissions, climate change, and multiple stressors. So we'll get a strong research perspective there. And last but certainly not least, we will hear from Ana Belén Sanchez, who is an agricultural engineer with a master's degree in renewable energy and energy market from the School of Industrial Organization. She also holds a master's degree in agricultural economics from the University of London. She is the Green Jobs Specialist for Latin America and the Caribbean at the International Labour Organization, ILO, based in Mexico. Previously, she was the coordinator of the Sustainability Department of Fundación Alternativas in Spain and climate change specialist at the ILO in Geneva. She has been a regular contributor to the different green jobs courses of the ILO Training Center in Turin, Italy. In recent years, she has worked on green jobs, climate change, energy, and sustainability agenda with different organizations for Greenpeace, UNICEF, ISTAS, and ECODES, and others. So those are the panelists that we have today. Angela has given a brief introduction of herself. I would just like to thank her again and appreciate her contribution to this. It's been a pleasure working with her. I'd like to note she's given her title already, but there's a couple things from her bio that I would like to note that really struck me, that really emphasized her commitment to this issue, which is first, the fact that she's a Ojibwe woman from the Wikwemikong Unceded Reserve territory and a member of the Wanapiti First Nation, but she's a mother of 2 and a grandmother of 5 and resides in the Sudbury region. And I think this is something we really need to consider. This is an intergenerational issue, and we need to think not only about the needs of today, but the needs of the future. Previous to this post, Angela was the lead in Aboriginal Affairs. She's the CEO in Nigazid of Shkagimakwai Health Center, and previous to this post, Angela was the lead in Aboriginal Affairs at Laurentian University from 1984 to 2010. She has worked hard at ensuring the contributions of First Nations, Métis, and Inuit people are recognized in the health, education, community mobilization sectors. She also advocates for the people at many other levels: Ministry of Community and Safety and Correctional Services, Northern Ontario School of Medicine Board of Directors, Social Planning Council Board of Directors, and the Board of the Association of Ontario Health Centres. She's recently been appointed as the chair of the Indigenous Primary Healthcare Council. And Angela walks with integrity, and this has been very evident for me from the short time I've gotten to know her, dignity and respect in all that she does. And she is passionate and stands true to her world view of natural law and her tenet of making healthy choices for our seventh generations. So with that, I would like to pass over the, introduce a video that is going to be shared with us from our Minister of Environment and Climate Change Canada, the Honourable Jonathan Wilkinson, will be sharing a brief video introduction to help us ground in this topic. So I'll pass it over to Alvaro and team for the playing of that video.
Good morning. I am joining you this morning from Vancouver, which is on the and I'm pleased to have this opportunity to share a few words with all of you taking part in today's Northern Ontario Circular Economy Symposium. I am delighted that you are actively engaged in some of the most timely and critical discussions when it comes to building a more healthy and resilient economy and environment for Northern Ontario. These conversations are taking place between governments, businesses, communities, and youth in Canada and all around the world. I have had the pleasure to take part in many of these discussions. You understand that it is important now, more than ever, for us to work together to build the world we want and the world we need. And that is what circular economy principles are about. They support a cleaner and more competitive economy, both globally and regionally. The transition to a more circular economy is an enormous opportunity. It will help us respond to the crises we are facing, resulting from climate change and rapid biodiversity loss. And according to the World Economic Forum, it is also a $1 trillion opportunity that can help us build back better from the impacts of the pandemic we face today. It offers cost-saving opportunities and new opportunities for businesses. A more circular, clean growth economy is a rapidly accelerating reality. We are already seeing governments, communities, research institutes, non-governmental organizations, and businesses across Canada taking steps to increase circularity. For example, Canada's forest bioeconomy is applying circular principles to produce value-added products such as bioplastics, biofuels, and green chemicals. Canadian mines are also becoming more resource, energy, and water efficient. And the Government of Canada is supporting efforts to reduce waste and keep the value of our resources, materials, and products in the economy, working closely with provinces and territories. We are supporting circular economy research, Canadian innovators, communities, and globally applicable solutions, sponsoring studies to identify the challenges and opportunities for a circular economy in Canada, and helping Canadian innovators solve key challenges such as the manufacture of compostable disposable surgical masks and respirators for use by healthcare workers. Our government is continuing to work on effective, transparent, and efficient policy approaches that will help the economy recover, create conditions for new green jobs, and reduce emissions. That includes our commitment to moving forward on a circular economy for plastics. Together with provinces and territories, we have set a target of zero plastic waste by 2030 with a comprehensive approach to get there. By managing plastics throughout their life cycle and driving investment in recycling infrastructure, we can spur innovation in product design and generate revenue. And importantly, we can reduce greenhouse gas emissions and create jobs here in Canada. It takes all of us working together, and it starts with regions like Northern Ontario exploring the opportunities and benefits that circularity can bring. Naturally, the circular economy will reflect the challenges, the strengths, and opportunities of each region. For Northern Ontario, your unique economic makeup, including a strong natural resource base, your large geography, and your strong communities and culture, will no doubt help determine what the circular economy looks like for you. To further stimulate discussion and exchanges, I am excited that this September, Canada is hosting the World Circular Economy Forum. The World Circular Economy Forum will bring dynamic new voices to the global conversation and take an in-depth look at circular opportunities in the North American and global contexts. Stay tuned in the coming weeks and months for more details. I certainly hope that you are able to join us there. Thank you very much.
Okay, so Chimigwech to Mark and Charles, to your teams for coordinating and all of the efforts that went into having the Honorable Jonathan Wilkinson join us here this morning and to provide some words of welcome and a review of what the circular economy can look like and our efforts here in Northern Ontario. I would now like to call upon my friend Mark Sierre to say a few words of welcome. And also I would like to say Chimigwech Nichgan David for your opening introductory remarks and all of your Thanksgiving. I'm very grateful to be working alongside of you this morning. And Mark, my dear friend, Chimigwech, for giving me the opportunity to join you and work alongside your team. So the floor is yours, my friend. Nahau.
Fabulous. Hello, bonjour, Annie, miigwech, everyone. Thank you, Angela and David. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today for this virtual symposium. Wow, we had over close to 250 registrations. We know this is an important topic, so this is amazing. And it's abundantly clear that there's an immense interest in building an innovative and strong economy. And I want to thank all of you for taking the time to participate and also taking the time to learn and also to contribute to today's conversation on circular economy and a regional approach for Northern Ontario. Looking forward to your questions and follow up afterwards. Thank you. As clearly indicated by our Minister, Jonathan Wilkinson, Minister of Environment and Climate Change, the need to move forward with opportunities for growth while protecting our environment. There is no reason why we can't create jobs while sustaining our natural resources. Canada is ready to forge new public policies around a healthy environment and a healthy economy. L'impact que le gouvernement fédéral doit faire ici, c'est tellement important que nous prenons un rôle primordial pour supporter les entreprises, supporter les provinces lorsqu'on regarde une économie circulaire. We can also support job growth by investing in green technology, innovation, encouraging businesses to explore their business models to focus more on sustainability and innovation. As a member of Parliament for Nickel Belt, my purpose is to support policy and organizations who have bold visions. They bring back legislation based on recommendations of local businesses, organizations, and residents. I'm confident we will develop together a healthy environment and a healthy economy for Northern Ontario. I've heard time and time again that people want good jobs, but they also want to ensure that the planet, our environment, is protected. In speaking with business leaders, trade unions, municipal governments, local chambers, residents, youth groups, the push for diversity and strengthen our environment and economy has never been so important. Mainstreaming environmental sustainability into business and decision-making may be controversial for some, but the scale has dipped largely in its favor. We must emphasize values like innovation, efficiencies, along with reducing waste and pollution and benefiting people's health. That doesn't involve changing the ideas. It means reframing them in a way that educates people to emphasize the benefits and offer clarity. Our planet is under climate emergency crisis, and we all face challenging times as it relates to this the pandemic COVID-19, with serious issues as social justice to support our most vulnerable in our communities. Climate emergency is real, social justice is real, worker retraining is real, reconciliation with our Indigenous people is real. Green economy with a greener job is real. Our goal with this and future symposium is to create more self-sustaining communities, producing more jobs, attracting new investments, capitalizing on developing a new green economy, becoming our own supply chain here in Northern Ontario and reaping the benefits regionally. I strongly believe that these international green prosperity dollars as investments that Northern Ontario has what it takes to work with the world to develop a greener economy with zero waste and sustainable green jobs and better, greener outcomes for existing businesses and industries with energy efficiencies. David properly introduced our 5 panelists earlier. I won't go into the detail other than to thank them so much for taking the time today. Aaron, John, Peter, Anna, and Gary, thank you for your insight, and we're looking forward to the discussion in a few minutes. Alors, les rencontres que nous regardons aussi avec les panélistes, c'est tellement important que nous prenons le temps d'étudier le sujet d'économie circulaire et de regarder à protéger l'environnement et l'économie ensemble. Yes, future symposiums are coming. I'd like to thank, and I'll let Charles Cirkwell from Northern Policy Institute to outline the future symposiums as a closing remarks. And it's been great to work with Charles' team to develop these symposiums. Thank you also locally to organizations like the Climate Citizen Lobby Group, Kathy Orlando, Fridays for Futures Youth, Coalition for Livable Sudbury, Rethink Green for keeping the climate emergency at the forefront. According to climateenergencydeclaration.org, 413 municipalities across Canada have declared a state of emergency. Thank you to the Northern Ontario municipalities like Greater Sudbury, West Nipissing, Kenora, Thunder Bay, have declared a state of emergency. And if I missed so, please add the municipalities in the Zoom chat box. Clearly, all levels of government, federal and provincially, need to support at the grassroots our municipalities better. This is clearly a nonpartisan issue as we develop our economies moving forward. So thank you, Angela and Rekala and David Oswald, for moderating this event. Both your expertise are so important. Thank you for taking the time to do this. We have the people, the vision, the knowledge, the post-secondary institutions, research powerhouses to lead this. This is a movement, and we have the leaders in Northern Ontario to make this happen. Looking forward to seeing the next step being brought forward in Nickel Belt, Greater Sudbury, Northern Ontario, Canada, and across the world. Also, I just want to take a few minutes here to thank a responsible corporate citizen. Thank you, Glencore, Peter Xavier, for sponsoring today's event. Finally, my favorite part of my speech here is I have the opportunity to introduce 2 special people, our current leaders and honored guests today. I take my passion, energy, and advice from these youth. Truly amazing to hear their perspective as they will inherit our economy and our planet. This group has been so active in our community with rallies, awareness events, and so many engaging initiatives to educate us adults on the environment and our economy. Also, I want to commit, and I have committed, to continue listening and amplifying your voices and acting to ensure your ideas are heard and accounted for. COVID has stalled their efforts, smaller groups sometimes, but their voice is strong. So with the grade 8 students from Llewellyn in Sudbury and from the Fridays for Futures youth movement in Greater Sudbury, I welcome Sophia Mathur and Jane Walker. So to say a few words. So I want to thank everyone for participating. Merci beaucoup d'avoir assisté aujourd'hui. Now I'll give the floor back to Angela and David. Thank you, Miigwech. Thank you. Merci.
So hello, my name is Sophia Mather and I'm here with my friend Jane Walker. We are Fridays for Future Sudbury Youth. We have been doing this work since November 2nd, 2018. We were the first group to establish Fridays for Future outside of Europe, and we strike every Friday because there's no point in going to school if we don't have a future to prepare for because of the climate crisis. We go out every Friday in front of Sudbury City Hall with protest signs for our future. During COVID lockdowns, we hold Zoom events and post on social media. We invite politicians to many of our events and continue to raise awareness throughout the year. Our main message since our very beginnings is listen to the experts and cooperate.
This past summer, Sophia, our friend Maggie, and myself were trained by Al Gore in climate reality. It is very apparent at this point that we're in a climate emergency. Did you know that the last 6 years on record were the hottest 6 years? The climate crisis is a real threat to all living things on this planet.
We also learned that it's very important to price pollution, but also implement a circular economy. A circular economy is not only productive, but it is also sustainable.
We need to end the human practice of taking, making, using, disposing, and polluting, and we need to seriously invest in reusing, remaking, recycling, and reducing.
Sudbury has already done this. In Sudbury smelters, industry reduced sulfur pollution by capturing it and recycling it as sulfuric acid.
Thank you very much for taking the time, effort, and cooperation to develop a more circular economy in Northern Ontario.
Our future depends on it.
Go circular economy.
Go circular economy. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, Chimigwech, Sophia, and Jane, thank you so much for your leadership. In past, we would hear people speak about the youth as future leaders, but that's not the case. You are the leadership, and you've taken a hold of a critical responsibility for future generations. And as David suggested earlier, I am a grandmother of 5. And I am very hopeful that my grandchildren, as they come into a leadership role like the two of yous, will not be having the same conversations as we are right now. So keep doing the great work that you're doing. Your voices are pinnacle in this movement to ensure that we protect our first mothers. So thank you for all of your efforts. It's an absolute pleasure to hear your passion and your commitment to making a change for our future. So Chimigwech for joining us today. Much respect to both of you. Now it's my absolute pleasure to invite Erin Henry, Senior Director for Natural Resources and Sustainable Policy with the Canadian Chamber of Commerce. Erin is going to share remarks on circular economies as they relate to business, technology, and innovation. So miigwech for joining us, Erin, and the floor is yours, my friend.
Thanks so much, Angela, and thank you to David as well for the introduction earlier. As said, I'm Erin Henry, Senior Director of Natural Resource Sustainable Growth, Canadian Chamber of Commerce. I'm coming to you from Ottawa on what is the traditional territory of the Algonquin people, which remains unceded. I think, I sort of want to start the conversation a little bit more high level, and I know we've got a lot of expertise coming in on the back end, and so we'll sort of present that opportunity to kind of get into those more granular details. But I think, when we look at this as an opportunity and sort of see where the circular economy is coming from as a set of policies and a set of practices, there really are sort of 4 main overarching drivers that I think are really important to be attentive to. So one is simply scarcity. And we can't get around that. The reality is that at present, our population, our global population, the level of consumption from our global population exceeds 400% of Earth's current carrying capacity. And by 2030, 2040, there'll be another 2 billion people potentially within the middle class globally seeking kind of that level of consumption. And so that's a significant challenge. It presents strains on all our resources, from our natural resources, our water, our space, our land. In addition to this as well, that type of scarcity in resources, if not attended to, and sort of a push to get the most out of our resources and our products to make them as recyclable and reusable as possible, we're looking at sort of a total of $25 trillion in extra costs by 2050, and those costs will be borne by everybody. But it comes down to scarcity and consumption, and therefore increases in resource prices. And so that's a real significant challenge. The flip side of that, of course, too, is that increasingly we are seeing the need to prevent further losses of biodiversity, finding ways to maximize the use of our non-renewable natural resources, and of course having a fine balance there between continual growth of populations and land use changes, and sort of the challenges there that come for living in cities, and of course to broader abilities to maintain that we keep the natural geographies as key carbon sinks. In addition to that, I think it's also very important to be attentive to sort of what is a structural change. We're seeing changes in the ways in which countries relate to each other in trade policy, and so we may see a continued period of significant reshoring of production, changes in supply chains. And so, for instance, if we see the sort of continuation of America First policies, there's a need for Canada and for other nations to find their own ways to be more self-reliant. And there's a number of ways to do that, but one way is to ensure that we are utilizing the resources we have as effectively as possible. And finally, of course, Canada finds itself in a position where other jurisdictions are pursuing greater circularity. And I think as you start to see climate policy expand, you will see similar sort of mirroring in what becomes climate trade policy. And so having a circular economy is going to be a key part of doing business with those nations, I think, and ensuring market share for Canadian producers here. With that said, I think that that's sort of a mixture of sort of what the drivers might be. We need to be cognizant that this is actually the potential to pursue a circular economy is a considerable opportunity for Canada's business community. And of course, that comes down to both approaches towards creating a circular economy for plastic, but also I think that there's a real opportunity here for the resource sector. And I would actually sort of put that forward, that I think, what is a key issue right now is that we've see good federal leadership in terms of acknowledging the issues around plastics and making that into a policy priority. I do think, though, that we need to be also very aware that the circular economy is not just plastics, that there are actually significant opportunities for Canada's resource sector that would come from sort of pursuing greater circularity. And I'm going to go over that in a really high level right now. I'm thinking in terms of Northern Ontario, where there are significant natural resources and established industries. It comes to mind that we should be thinking about policies in the areas of both forestry, pulp and paper, and of course mining. And so, as I go through this discussion, I'm going to briefly outline sort of what are some of those opportunities that other jurisdictions are taking to achieve greater circularity in the resource sector, and then of course finish, I think, with a high level of some potential policy steps that could be taken that would supplement the incentives to sort of move in that direction for businesses. So, as many of you have probably heard, there is a increased awareness around critical minerals and metals. There is a recognition that Canada needs to have its own critical mineral metal plan, and there's the business community definitely wants to acknowledge the steps by this government in having the foresight to pursue a strategy like that. But I think an additional component of that strategy is really thinking about what Canada can do to get the most out of its metals. And so, looking forward, there is simply going to be a continued commodity boom when it comes to minerals and metals. And that's going to come from the growing imprint of electronics throughout society, and as well the fact that many of these metals are critical to clean technologies that are becoming increasingly driven and embedded in the recovery plans and green stimulus of other nations. And so there's certainly an opportunity there. And kind of right off the top, there's a list of sort of probably 46 of these, but well-known ones are cobalt, copper, lithium, nickel, indium, as well as a whole series of other rare earth metals. The reality is that we need to think about both ways in which Canada can achieve access in those markets, but also thinking about, are there some ways in which we can start to utilize the resources and the mines that we already have to start to fill that demand. The other side of that too, going back to the question about reshoring and scarcity, is that if Canada is able to find ways to be more circular and actually start to extract greater value of our minerals and metals, and also in some cases, as I'll get into, utilize the waste of tailings more effectively, this might also help Canada position itself as a necessary hedge on rare earth metal supplies, which currently China has a virtual monopoly on, which is of course a long-term concern and creates an additional supply chain pressure. So One thing that comes to mind is that we need to be mindful that there's all these opportunities in terms of the mining sector, but also recognizing that, continual expansion of that sector is incredibly costly. And so, I think that we need to think through both the fact that we do need to continue to open new mines and seek that development, but doing so, for many producers can cost hundreds of millions of dollars, excluding exploration costs, and are also subject to increased regulatory challenges as well, which are can be a challenge to attract the needed investment for a lot of these operations. And so, well, I think we need to make sure that we are able to address that upstream demand to get more minerals and metals. There is a circular economy solution here as well, and that really involves thinking through how we can both utilize the tailings of existing operations more effectively, but also, and this I think is really quite critical, is potentially actually rehabilitating abandoned mines in terms of actually going through mines that are no longer operational and the tailings that are still there and actually find critical minerals and metals. And so Australia has been very successful at doing this in its own mines. So for instance, they have been using this technologies to essentially manage mines that once produced tin, silver, and copper, as well as zinc mines, to basically extract key metals for electric vehicles, as well as for other electronics. Another thing that's kind of come for an example of this, there are trial methods being used of what is called, bacterial oxidization, essentially to capture cobalt in pyrite-rich tailings. At the moment, cobalt exchanges hands for about $23,000 per ton in USD. And so, of course, being able to apply that technology effectively is a significant advantage. It allows for what otherwise is a latent waste product to be captured and sold through supply chains, and it also contributes to the management of those waste tailings that do come off operations. And so that is a significant there's significant potential there. We're also sort of seeing increased filtration technologies being utilized to essentially source some of the minerals that are critical for lithium batteries. So again, there are opportunities there. Other jurisdictions are starting to utilize those, and there's a real nice combination between both getting the most out of current assets and assets that may be open in the future, while also doing our best to recognize that there is still value to be found and resources to be fully utilized for mines that may be dormant or no longer active. The same side, there's a significant opportunity in the forestry sector. In reality, the forestry sector has been engaged in circular practices now for decades. This has been a result of sort of finding pulp and paper mills that have been incredibly innovative over the last basically 3 decades since the 80s to grapple with what has been changing global markets. And so there's been an awful lot of efforts and thought in sort of being able to reuse leftover wood fibers very successfully. So just as an example, already many pulp and paper mills have been basically capturing leftover wood fiber and using that to sell to the brick industry. And that basically allows for those products to those industries to minimize their waste, to find ways to capture additional value. And to the point right now that basically of the fibers that are used in brick production, 30% of that is actually supplied by the pulp and paper industry. So it's a really good example of finding the ways in which you can develop these sort of supply chain relationships that takes basically what the output is, the output or the waste output of one process, and make it into the input into another. On that point, there has been efforts made by this government to invest, I believe it's 28.5 million in Domtar in Sudbury to sort of allow that pulp and paper mill operation there to continue to develop new circular economy solutions, find paper-based solutions and alternatives to plastics, as well as to basically scale what has been a technology that's been in the wings for years now, which is cellulose nanocrystals, which is sort of a key ways in which you can utilize leftover cellulose fibers to basically create a multi-purpose product that can sort of have applications across numerous industries. Same kind of opportunity has started to arise. There's been a key partnership that's developed between Rio Tinto, Geocycle, and Lafarge Construction to find ways in which to take aluminum smeltings and use that as an input into the cement industry, which is, again, a key way to capture waste. Another way to help the cement industry, which is emissions intensive, cut some of those emissions through incorporating an alternative approach. With all that said as well, I think that, and I think there's greater expertise on this panel for this point, but those are not only opportunities for the resource sector that I think we can continue to build upon and play with, but those are also opportunities that speak directly to changing workforces for the resource sector. And so the reality is, I think that we do see the resource sector itself as a key employer. It creates great jobs, and it's a really important sector to continue to grow and develop. But it is not immune to the forces of the fourth industrial revolution. And so we're seeing more remote work being integrated into resource projects and more automation. And so in some ways, if you can start to integrate circular solutions in ways that value that currently isn't being realized comes to be realized, you're not only creating more adjacent industries for that sector, but you're also helping to grow upstream work as well, because there's simply more value coming up from those upstream operations. And so I think that is a really key point. At the moment, the ILO is predicting that there will be 18 million jobs created by 2030 by circular economy solutions. And right now, if you were to look at the waste segment industry, that's probably 1,300 jobs in Ontario alone. But for economies of comparable size to Canada, there's been estimates that run up to about 500,000 jobs. I know I'm running out of time, so I'm going to really wrap this up quite quickly. So what are some of the policy drivers that can help us get there? I think that one key step is to really expand the definition of clean technologies and basically include technologies that create greater circularity in the reuse of products and materials to ensure that they're eligible for the same financing and tax deductions that are currently available to clean technologies from other sectors. In addition, there's probably some significant opportunities to explore cases where circular projects can pass the test of additionality and reduce emissions. And those should be written into Canada's offset protocols as they come out, simply because that creates a secondary business model, as well as improving the general access to offsets for all heavy and energy-intensive industries. There's also probably a need to consider building more frameworks that allow for the recovery of our resource producers to ensure that those products can be returned. And there might even, for instance, be some room here to consider subsidies put in place for the recovery per ton of materials. And that is an outcome-focused approach. It's an approach that could be in some ways similar to the ways in which the US has used the recovery of CO2 through carbon sequestration to advance carbon storage technologies. We could do the same thing in terms of actually having an approach that allows for recovered materials to be eligible for some sort of subsidy from government. So that's, again, the high level, the overview. I think there's people far more learned than me who will be able to probably drive home the finer points.
Great. Thank you very much, Aaron. Appreciate the insights. Great contribution. I think we will hear, in fact, some of the more finer details about the mining sector from Peter, as well as the opportunities for innovation and research from John. I'd also just like to note there that one of the key takeaways that I got from that presentation was the fact that the circular economy is very multidimensional. So it's not only about, say, plastics alone or any one given product or service or sector for that matter, but there are some clear opportunities in the Canadian economy for our natural resource sector to further embrace these concepts. And in fact, as Aaron noted, it can become a competitive advantage and a strategic imperative for us to do so. So a lot of key insights from Aaron's presentation. But one thing I'd like to note, as you'll see, I'm actually in my Montreal office here, and I'm flanked to my right by images of Bob Marley, and my left of images of Albert Einstein. So they're watching over us in this dialogue. And I think with the circular economy, it's not only about the strategic imperatives and carbon and plastic and recycling, but there's a significant human dimension to that. So I believe that we need to use our brains in order to figure out the technical solutions and the process adaptions and the strategies to transform our economy. But at the same time, we also have to think with our hearts and with compassion. And I think our next speaker will definitely highlight some of those points, which is the human dimension of the circular economy, and particularly as it relates to health. So I'd like to introduce Dr. Gary Boda, who's the chair of Climate and Health Task Force of Northern Ontario School of Medicine and the invited chair of the Ontario chapter of the Canadian Association of Physicians for the Environment. The floor is yours, Dr. Boda.
Thank you very much. And thank you, MP Mark Sray, for inviting me here today. I'm just going to get my slides up and going. Okay, good. So first, I would like to acknowledge that I'm on Robinson Huron Treaty Territory, and the land on which I'm sitting is a traditional territory of the Atikameksheng Anishinaabe peoples. I'm going to start with a few stories. Having been an emergency physician for the last 38 years, I've got lots of stories. These are some of the tame ones, but I'll give them anyways. So about 6 years ago, and they are all linked, by the way, about 6 years ago, I was working a shift in the emergency department. A young gentleman came in with unusual symptoms and a rash that I'd never seen before. After doing some chatting with colleagues, it turned out it was the first case of Lyme disease I had seen here in my Northern Ontario city of Sudbury. In 2016, I was out for a hike on our local trails behind Laurentian University. It was a hot summer day, and you may or may not know that 2016, along with 2020, were the two hottest years that have been recorded globally. In any case, I came across a woman standing over her partner. They'd been out for a hike. He had gotten confused, collapsed, and I found him lying unconscious on the ground. And it took us about 2 hours to get paramedics into the area and get him out of that location. A couple of years after that, in 2018, we had a particularly large forest fire in our region, the Parry Sound 33 fire. That's the picture top left on your screen. And throughout the course of that summer, while the fire raged, we saw an unprecedented number of patients presenting to our emergency department with asthma attacks, and this has included children, and particularly children. Some places that had had recent fire events actually were running out of their inhalers. And even once the fire was over, people were coming in with mental health problems, severe anxiety, senses of loss. They'd lost their places that they'd had forever, their homes and such. This past summer, we had the opportunity, my wife and I, to visit one of our children in Vancouver for a week at the end of the summer. That's a picture bottom left of Vancouver. Because of the unprecedented forest fires taking place on the West Coast, from California through Oregon, and the smoke and particulate pollution that was coming up the whole West Coast because of that. And of course, in the center of the screen is something we all recognize by now. This is our infamous COVID virus. And that has been, on top of all these things, incredibly disruptive over the past several months. So what do all these things have in common? Well, they're all related to climate change. So starting in the north, we've found that food patterns have changed, winter travel patterns have changed, hunting has changed. On the West Coast and in Ontario and elsewhere, we're having increasing number of wildfires causing asthma, evacuation from homes, exacerbation of other diseases. Across the West, we've had unprecedented floods and the damage associated with those, and droughts that are affecting crops and the yield from crops. The micronutrients in crops are starting to fall. Kids are getting zinc and other deficiencies. We're seeing more people with allergies. The pollen season's getting longer. When you have a flood, we're getting a lot of flooded basements, molds are growing. And so we're seeing a lot of disease related to that. As I mentioned, we're seeing tick-borne diseases now at higher rates than we've ever seen them. Heat-related illnesses. My collapsed person on the trail, he was a heat stroke. victim. And every year now we're having 2,000 to 3,000 people per year affected by heat and dying from heat in this country alone. So lots of health-related problems related to climate. I'm going to just take a minute and talk about the concept of planetary health. In the past, we always thought about health as human health. But what we're finding now, and I refer you to the bottom of my image there, is we really live in a nest that depends on the environmental determinants of health. We need clean air, we need clean water, we need clean food, and we need a stable climate. And if we have all those things in operation, then we can build up our society, our social, what we call our social determinants of health. We can create an economy, we can create education, we can create good housing and food and social justice. And if everything's working well, we can do really advanced things like build sophisticated healthcare systems. And we've done that. The problem is our nest is starting to crack. I don't know if it's affected anyone else, but the crack caused by COVID has in my life been very disruptive over the past year. So why is this happening? Well, I think we really have to remember that we've lived in an environmental sweet spot for the last 11,000 years since the start of the agricultural revolution. But what's happening now? And it's kind of funny because I made this slide about 4 years ago. It's no longer applicable. We're not at 1.1 degrees Celsius anymore. This year, the globe hit 1.2 degrees Celsius above its pre-industrial times. In Canada, it's going up even faster. In the far north, it's going up 3 times as fast. That's a steep curve. I don't know how you get 3 times as fast as that, but that's where we're at. And why is this happening? Well, as you know, to paraphrase President Bush, it's not the economy stupid, it's the carbon stupid. These are the changes in carbon dioxide over the last almost 1 million years. And quite frankly, if I saw vital signs that look like this on a patient, we'd be calling an emergency. We would be doing everything we could to try to change the slope of that curve. You can see how steep it's going at the end. So at the end of the day, what we're thinking more and more in medicine is that climate change really is the biggest global health threat of the 21st century. COVID's been bad, but really COVID's nothing compared to what we're seeing from climate, even starting now. Fortunately, climate change is also the biggest global health opportunity of the 21st century. If we create clean energy, we end up having a much better way of, our asthma rates go down, our heart disease rates go down, it's generally healthier. If we create a sustainable and active transportation system with walking, biking, we know that the incidence of diabetes goes down again, heart disease goes down, obesity goes down. And the same applies with creating a sustainable food system and healthy diets. And if we do all these things right, it's actually been estimated that the economic savings, in other words, we're going to have to spend less on healthcare, more than makes up for the cost of transitioning to a clean society. So where does healthcare actually come into this? Well, we have a high level of healthcare, as you can see on this graph, that's measured on the left-hand axis. But we spend a lot, it costs us a lot to get there. Per capita in Canada, there's about 1,200 kilos of CO2 created per capita to run our healthcare system. That's a lot of CO2. We create a lot of waste in our healthcare system as well. About 26 pounds of waste per day per patient. About 30% of this gets recycled at this point. 60% goes into the garbage, and about 10% is biological waste, and it usually gets incinerated. So where does all this come from? Well, the country doing the most on this right now is in the UK. The UK, through their national health system, has decided that they are going to reduce their waste and their carbon footprint by 80% by sometime between 2028 and 2032. They're not entirely sure how that's all going to happen, but they're starting to measure. And what they're finding is that within the national health system, and Canada's fairly similar, I suspect, they've done other countries as well, that's probably our closest matchup, is waste and water account for about 5%. Using particular gases, and I'm going to talk about those in the operating room, accounts for about 5%. There's a lot of travel we do now, both of patients and staff. And so as we transition to virtual care, which we're starting to do in some instances, we're going to have an impact there. But fully 60% of our carbon emissions in the healthcare sector come from the supply chains. And these supply chains are extensive and worldwide. Drugs, surprisingly, account for a surprisingly large amount of our carbon footprint through the manufacture of drugs, the distribution of drugs, and the taking of, in some cases, the right drugs, sometimes the wrong drugs. So there's lots of work that can be done there. So a couple of quick stories, and we have to look at what we're disposing of, how we're procuring things, and what our values are around this. So on the top of your screen there is an anesthetic machine. And an interesting local story. There's a physician, Dr. Mathur, who just happens to be Sophia, who you saw earlier in our presentations with the FFFs. This is her father. He's an anesthetist at our hospital. And he started looking into the drugs they use to put patients asleep. And there are various volatile anesthetics, gases that get used. Turns out one of them is a particularly nasty greenhouse gas. Does it offer any advantages? Some people thought so, but it's really very minor, the advantages that gas adds to any patient's outcome. So through his education, advocacy, the local hospital has just about gotten rid of that gas. The result of removing one gas like that from the system turns out to be the equivalent at one hospital of driving 3 million kilometers per year. So you can make huge differences by looking at what you're using, in this case, anesthetic gas-wise. Now, are there other ways of handling it? Yes, some places are taking those same gases, and again, through the circular economy lens, scrubbing those gases, cleaning them, and reusing them. So one can do that with these various gases, and there are other ones that are in use. Now, a story that isn't so good, perhaps, is it the right thing to do to take your, on the top right, sorry, I'm just getting particular chats. Oh, 2-minute countdown. So we're going to skip that. What I'm going to do very quickly is say, to have sustainable healthcare, we need less waste and more health. And more information is coming out about that, but we need more education around this theme. Fortunately, we do have a Canadian Coalition of Green Healthcare. They do put out an annual Green Hospital Scorecard, and there are winners in the areas of energy, leadership, and waste, among others. One thing that healthcare can do, though, is we know we need rapid social change. You saw the steepness of those graphs about where we're heading temperature-wise. But to move from business as usual to a decarbonized state, we need more social tipping points. We have our FFF students out there, but we need educated healthcare individuals helping, because healthcare workers are trusted messengers, and we can help you and virtually all industries get through this. So let's all work together. We got lots to do. There's lots of things we can do within healthcare, and healthcare workers can do a lot to help you as well. Thank you.
Miigwech, Gary, thank you so much for your wisdom, your knowledge, and your expertise in your presentation. I too want to acknowledge the wealth of knowledge that you have. You spoke to all our relations, and I think that's one of the elements as a human family, we need to identify and go back to our original teachings that are rooted in all of the elements that Shkakmakwe provides to us, and all our relations then speaks to the plant life, the animal kingdom, the four-leggeds, the crawlers, and the flyers, and how that impacts that circular economy. And you honing into what those impacts can look like from a human perspective. So Miigwech, very much for your time and your wisdom. Your presentation was filled with so much knowledge, and I'm certain that there'll be plenty of questions at the end of our session today. So Miigwech, Gary, for your time. It's now my pleasure to introduce Peter Xavier, Vice President of Glencore, Greater Sudbury Operations, and Chair of Ontario Mining Association, to give some remarks on mining. I'd also like to again reiterate our thanksgiving, Peter, as the sponsor for today's event, and we look forward to listening to your expertise and your wisdom here this morning. Naha Miigwech, the floor is yours, Peter.
Thank you very much. I want to go into display settings to put duplicate to get the full screen. Just go to display settings at the top. Duplicate, duplicate. Perfect, thank you. Well, thank you for the introduction, and thank you for the invitation and the opportunity to speak. I hope to give the mining perspective and really an opportunity to demonstrate, I think, where mining actually truly embodies the whole concept of circular economy. So hopefully, I know it's a diverse audience, and I'll try to do the topic justice, and hopefully at the end of the presentation, you agree that mining is really at the forefront of this concept. Next slide. Just to start off, just from a Glencore perspective, we're proud, and it gives us real purpose to our organization and our employees to provide a lot of the key products that the world needs for modern life. Of course, from a Sudbury context, we produce mainly nickel and copper, but we also produce cobalt, platinum, palladium, gold, and silver as well. And they're really the front end of the circular economy, which is producing the raw materials into the marketplace. Some of the challenges we face is we're dealing with finite resources. So we're always having to look for new investment opportunities. And those are getting, in more remote areas, and in Sudbury's case, getting deeper and deeper. And we don't set the price for a lot of our products. So we're not able to pass on costs to the consumer, which is a particular challenge, especially as we go to depth in Sudbury. But a lot of talk around new uses of metals, of course, as modern life continues to evolve, and talk about batteries or your cell phone, mobile devices, et cetera, communication systems. But even just the basics of life, whether getting electricity and clean water to your house, some of the things we rely on maybe don't even think about. So really a lot of uses for our products. And as the old adage goes, that if in terms of the source for raw materials, if you can't grow it, you have to mine it. And really there wouldn't be much of an agriculture industry without some of the contributions from mining. So next slide. From an economic perspective, we have Glencore operations throughout a large part of Canada. A lot of the base metal operations really focused around Ontario and Quebec. I'll focus just on the Sudbury contribution, long history of mining in Sudbury. Of course, our economic contributions support our employees and contractors, communities, First Nation, Indigenous communities, a key stakeholder. We have, I believe, very good relationships with all communities and collaborate constantly. Downstream users, of course, benefit from the products we produce, small, medium-sized enterprises, academia, research, and so on. And most of the benefit from our spend is really right in the community, and what's not in the community is mostly in the province. Just for rough order of magnitude, our combined operating and capital spend last year was nearly $1 billion. So, that goes a long way into, benefiting the community. And what's really nice to see is, over the years, a lot of the smaller companies that grew up in Sudbury started out supplying the local mining operations, have diversified and grow, and now serve the global marketplace. So a real sort of sustainability aspect of the economy here in Sudbury. Next slide. For Sudbury operations, what I'm responsible for, the only thing not shown here is the Port of Quebec operations, but we have 2 underground mines, a project in construction, our Onaping Depth project, a mill concentrator, a smelter. Most all operations are underground hard rock now, so pretty limited surface footprint. Of course, there's still several old mines around in the Sudbury Basin, but Nickel Rim is an example of a newer one, built in 2010. A lot of modern design features from an environmental sustainability perspective, a very small footprint. And one of the aspects to mining that many people don't realize is before we even do anything, we have to think about closure and decades beyond closure, which certainly is normal construction, or if you're building, say, a high-rise in downtown Toronto, not the sort of thing you have to think about, but it's part and parcel with the thinking that has to be applied to bringing mining investment online. Onaping Depth, I'll talk about a little bit later, but our new investment as our current mines are coming to end of life. That's over 2 kilometers, 2.5 kilometers underground. So we're having to go quite deep now to extract the metals. When Sudbury first started, you could see a lot of the outcrops right on surface. Of course, a lot of the near surface deposits are mined out. Just for illustrative purposes, that's like going almost 5 CN towers underground. Next slide. This is a bit of a process flow, what's in and out of our Strathcona mill. So of course, we process the feeds from our local mines, along with custom ore. Custom is the junior market. Some smaller companies don't have their own processing facilities, so we take that niche contribution within the marketplace. And from that, we make several products, like nickel concentrate that goes on to our nickel smelter, a copper concentrate to our copper smelter in Quebec. And we make a classified tailings product that there's a lot of discussion around tailings. Tailings, in layman's terms, is really ground up rock with all the metals removed as much as we can get out. And we use about 75% of it back to fill the voids underground as backfill. So that's a real good development that we've taken advantage of for many years. There is a smaller portion that's high in pyrrhotite that oxidizes and has a high sulfur content that we have to deposit in deep water deposition. And that's to ensure there's no acid mine drainage problems. Our water treatment system that's run by the mill is excellent. It's orders of magnitude below the emission standards from the regulatory authorities. So very, very well functioning system. And of course, there's a lot of research that's currently underway to look at different uses for tails or how to extract the metals that remain there. Of course, we've taken as much as we could, so it should tell you that what's left is quite hard to get out, pretty energy intensive, but there are efforts like that happening in academia and different research organizations, as well as some private enterprises that are looking at it. Next slide. From our smelter, it's really a hub of our sulfide nickel business. Of course, we process their own Sudbury feeds as well as our Raglan feed. Raglan is a mine we have in northern Quebec. A lot of talk about battery electric equipment in the marketplace, but good to point out here that we have an electric furnace here at our smelter. And we benefit from a clean grid here in Sudbury, so electricity is pretty much carbon free, as most of it's sourced from nuclear and hydro facilities. And so our focus historically has really been on emissions versus sort of GHG per se. But we always look at the context of where we operate. So Raglan, given they're very remote and run off diesel generators, have installed windmills to displace some of that. In Sudbury, that makes less sense, as we'd be essentially displacing clean hydro energy. So, we always have to look at what's appropriate depending where we're operating. You can see through all the effort of putting our feed through a mill and smelter, it's still just under half still waste. So it just gives you a sense of how much effort it is to isolate the metals. We do compete globally for custom feed into our smelter. And that's something we have to stay cost competitive and provide good recoveries and terms to continue to ensure that our smelter is full. And that's important because our local feed sources are declining. Secondaries is really a lot of waste products from other industries. A good example there of the circular economy. And it's a win-win situation. It's really what you call recycling. Win-win because it's materials that are very difficult to dispose of because they have metals in them for the facilities or industries that produce them. And good for us because we're able to extract the metals from that and put it back into the marketplace. And I'll go into a little bit more detail of that in the next slide. But another product that we produce is sulfuric acid, so we're able to convert the sulfur in our ores into sulfuric acid. That's an important, for agriculture, for water treatment systems, a lot of important uses in the marketplace. And the slag product is our waste product. Historically, had been used in various construction activities. If you live in Sudbury, you'll see that in certain aspects. We've taken a more cradle-to-grave product stewardship perspective at present, but there perhaps could be opportunity for alternate uses for the slag product. Next slide. One of from a GHG perspective, one of our main sources, almost all of it, we're pretty small. It's only just over 100,000 tons of GHG from our smelter. Comparatively, a steel plant might be several million tons, and most of that, 80+% is from coke addition into our furnace, and coke is a byproduct from another industrial process. We need it as a reagent in our furnace to create the right conditions to smelt, but it does take care of a waste product from another industry. There's not currently an alternative for that, so that's a challenge for us. It would likely need another type of organic to create the right chemical conditions, and it's really classified, I guess, as a fixed emission. We also built several years ago a calciner, which expanded our ability to process various feeds from other industrial processes, dries the feeds to be safely put into the furnace, and also, for example, battery recycling has a lot of inorganics, plastics, etc., that have to be taken care of and cleaned before putting it into the furnace. And I guess from a policy perspective, one thing to keep in mind is, we're a small GHG producer. We are at the mercy of the carbon tax and paying into it, and that's set to increase. But unfortunately, some of these, there's a sort of a balance between reducing emissions and metals, and some of that comes at the expense of GHG production. And recycling, there's no way to take advantage of our recycling efforts, even though it's overall better for the environment. By recycling, we're increasing emissions and intensity, and the current policies are punitive towards that. So I think it's just an opportunity to back up and consider some of these things in terms of what's overall best for the environment is what we'd recommend as a path forward. Next slide. This is an illustration from an SO2 perspective. Again, most of the focus at the smelter has been around metals emission reduction and SO2 reduction. You can see quite a drastic change over the years in blue. The regulatory limits in green dispel some of the myth that regulation is the way to drive innovation at all times. We're really proud of the ingenuity and innovation in the team there that has found a way to reduce sulfur emissions quite drastically, and at the same time increase nickel production. So to do those things at the same time is quite the challenge. In our current project, we have roughly around $300 million of smelter emission projects currently underway from about 2015 to present. And you can see it's really indiscernible the effect that's having at that part of the graph. And I guess it just illustrates that it's getting tougher and tougher to sort of make that next little improvement. And we're at the phase now where we have to start investing into our underground mines as they're coming to end of life to continue our operations in Sudbury. But just these aren't off-the-shelf solutions you could pull off and just implement. A lot of the innovations that gave us this result was the result of the ingenuity of the team there and various piloting and technology and process changes to scale it up, put a business case together and implement them and see the results. So it's part of the challenge of why it takes some time over the years. And of course, we believe government role is there to create the conditions for innovation and investment, and understanding that these are complex and multivariant issues. We also, it's important because we're dealing with such long cycles, decades and decades from initial exploration to closure. We have to think about adaptation as climate changes, of course. We're monitoring our operations decades after they're closed. Progressive rehabilitation is very important. We've in the past been able to offset some of the carbon taxes through forest management. We're no longer eligible, but we continue to do those things anyways to help where we can. Next slide. We do participate as well as through the Nickel and Cobalt Institutes and the life cycle analysis. So it gives a transparent way for anyone to see our performance against other players in the nickel space and the cobalt space. As you can see from the graph, the bubble size is a reflection of the magnitude of the GHG per nickel ton. So you can see us in Canada are leaps and bounds ahead of most parts of the world. And that's where we don't want to see, movement of investment from, Canadian type jurisdiction to other parts of the world, and want to continue the investment here. I think obviously that's the best overall situation. But that's, just a testament to the efforts that we've had over here over the last couple of decades. Next slide. I'll finish off with a little bit on mining innovation, so you could switch slides again. The mines are very, very small. GHG produce around 10,000 tons or so, mostly from natural gas that we need to heat the air in the wintertime, just given the northern climate, to make it hospitable and underground for our workers and also not to freeze our shafts. And so, when you look at innovation, we made a choice. One example is to go 100% battery electric equipment in our underground mines. And really, Northern Ontario is really at the forefront of pushing this. And we as an organization really pushed the marketplace for that when we made this investment decision back in 2017. The marketplace was very young. Our challenges were not the ones that create or make the machines. So we have to convince the marketplace to do it. We collaborated with a lot of other organizations to help push that marketplace, and the OEMs have responded. We had to work to create global standards so we don't have charging issues and other things that you might imagine. So it's a lot of effort behind the scenes to push this marketplace ahead, and we made the investment decision on the basis that we'd be 100% BEV. And it just goes to show you where you can't take a individual sort of narrow perspective on these things. BEV is a good solution because it hits multiple fronts. It reduces, of course, GHG because you're not burning diesel, and more importantly, less air underground means less to heat with natural gas. It also improves the hygiene underground, and it reduces a lot of the scope. But with less air, you need smaller fans, heating systems. Unfortunately, at depth, we have to heat the air in the wintertime and then cool it back underground to deal with the rock temperatures, and a lot less in smaller openings. So a big scope reduction. And that's really what made the investment decision to use BEVs compelling. On the final slide, I'll just show a quick video. And while that sets up, I'll just a couple concluding remarks. I encourage anyone to look at the Mining Association of Canada towards Sustainable Mining initiatives. The OMA has a strong zero waste, zero harm, and productivity increase initiatives, and as does CMIC, or the Canadian Mining Innovation Council, has a Rethink Mining that's looking for zero waste opportunities and initiatives as well. So, and all those are strongly supported by the mining industry in order to achieve the ends we're talking about. So I'll let you listen to the 2-minute video.
What if?
What if?
What if?
What if? What if we could start with a blank slate?
What if we could rethink how we design our mines?
What if our underground fleet was emission-free?
What if working alone no longer meant working by myself?
What if we could use technology to remove people from hazards?
What if I could go underground without leaving my office?
What if mine vehicles could drive themselves?
What if I could see the location and the status of everything and everyone underground instantly?
What if machines could sort ore from waste and leave the waste rock underground?
What if my equipment showed me what to repair before it broke down?
What if I can fly a drone to safely gather detailed information about the mine?
What if we didn't have to blast? What if we could just cut rock?
What if we could design a mine that transforms how mining is done?
What if we can all work together to make mining better, safer,
faster,
and more efficient?
What if all the technology we need is already out there?
At Glencore Sudbury Operations, we are reimagining the future.
What if we started building the mine of the future today?
What if we've already started?
So apologies, a bit choppy, but you can access that through a link on our website. There's a series of a few innovation videos. So thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Peter. Excellent presentation. And a lot of insights into the work that you and your team at Glencore are undertaking with respect to innovating your processes and the constraints and opportunities you're dealing with. And in fact, I remember as an undergrad, when I was in environmental science, one of the courses that at first I was not that excited about, but as soon as we got into it, opened my eyes to this world of mining and geomorphology, was that geomorphology and the whole notion of time, how looking at things from a geological standpoint and geological time really expands one's horizons. And I think we saw that particularly with the importance of our activities now in the timeline of development, as Gary noted, with respect to CO2 emissions. So innovation, I think, is a key thing we need to think about. And one of the questions that was brought up there in that video was a demonstration of the innovations that Glencore is undertaking, but that question of what if. So I'd like to kind of switch our minds over to this side of the equation now, which is the Albert Einstein part of this problem, which is figuring out what are the answers to those what if questions. And a lot of those answers are being undertaken by our next panelist, who is going to speak on behalf of his work and his colleagues. And I assure you there are a lot of neurons at work at Laurentian University. I've seen the presentation, it's fantastic. So I'd like to introduce and pass the floor to Dr. John Gunn from the Living with Lakes Center at Laurentian University and the Canada Research Chair to demonstrate to us some of the great work that they're doing and the importance of the educational and research institutions in Northern Ontario and Canada for addressing the circular economy. John, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and I'll see if I can share the video first. Thank you very much. I do too recognize my location here within the Robinson-Huron Treaty and Tikmasheen and Anishinaabe and Wanapitei First Nations traditional territories. Today I'm going to try to represent a larger research community that's operating in our case history study site, and for this particular presentation we'll be using Sudbury, the largest city in northeastern Ontario, as an example. But Sudbury is known across the whole world now as one of the great examples of wise investment in environmental improvements, and it's becoming a model for the rest of the world. So I'll take that in perspective. And Dr. Nathan Basilikos helped me with ideas around land, and Nadia Mikachuk around microbial solutions. And I'm showing you an award-winning building where we work, the LEED Platinum building. It's probably the only LEED Platinum building in northeastern Ontario. And inside of it, you can see what possibly the future might be in the use of wood. This building won the Design with Wood competition for Ontario, and might be the impetus for creating a new type of lumber industry for the future. Because if you look at it, it is not just a building, it is 180 tons of stored carbon. And probably in many ways a safer place to store carbon than in the trees surrounding the building, as Dr. Bodo mentioned the fire issue. One enormous product that we produce in research centers such as this is people and young people. So we're really needing to produce the critical thinkers of the future. And they have to have elite science communication skills, the fake news that we hear and the alternate facts. We can't tolerate those in a challenging world. And we need young people to be innovators. And I'm proud that we're producing some ourselves at this elite research center. It has the only graduate program in science communication beyond the undergraduate level in all of Canada. But we enter by June 5th this year is the announcement of the UN Decade of Restoration and the severe crisis the world is facing. And Sudbury has to be brought forth as an example where transformation was thought impossible, but proved to be possible. And what we're looking at is a landscape that has changed, and we're looking at the potential values that have been generated now out of this landscape, and making the transformation affects the costs of water treatment, the importance of carbon sequestration. From an industry perspective, it's reduction of liability insurance, and as Peter just mentioned, waste repurposing is very important here. So let's put our hats on as ecologists and look at this landscape from ecological principles. First, the importance of this site. This was the world's largest point source of sulfur dioxide on Earth, at 2.5 million tons in 1960. To put that in perspective, all of China today produces about 10 million tons per day. This was a bigger source than much of Europe is today. So, and to see, as Peter mentioned, air emissions reduced by 99% is a fabulous accomplishment for Sudbury, that we now need to turn to the greenhouse gas and other environmental issues. People can get this figure in detail later, but with clean air, there's been a whole timeline. It's maybe correlation rather than causation, but I don't think we would have created a film festival. We wouldn't have built science centers. We wouldn't have, in fact, won the Nobel Prize in Physics or created Canada's happiest city in the Sudbury of 1960. But as emissions declined, communities evolved to invest in other things. And this is what's going to be the future. As we invest in pollution controls, we open up the opportunities for investment in social and other community benefits. Peter already showed this tremendous accomplishment at one of the smelting companies, Glencore. But to me, this is really proof of the Michael Porter hypothesis that good government, good and well-crafted regulations can spur innovation and create the opportunity for industries to deal with the pollution problem and also become profitable and modernize. And I present this figure in other parts of the world, and it's always a really high impactful figure for other countries to see that it doesn't mean a clean company means we lose an industry. So let's take a naturalist point of view and an ecology point of view and look at what is our best example of an ultimate zero waste circular economy, nature. There's no waste in nature, it's completely reused, and to the betterment of all of us, as Dr. Boda mentioned. So what is it in nature that we should highlight? Well, there's the rejuvenation issues, there's connectivity, and there's continuous nutrient and elemental cycling. So how would we see those principles expressed in a human system? Well, let's take the example of Sudbury and ask the question, and we're stuck in a terrible pandemic right now and a terrible crisis, but can disturbance rejuvenate a city? How do we respond to catastrophe? And I think we've got to respond quickly. Well, let's look at Sudbury's catastrophes of the past. We were hit by a meteorite. We were ground down by glaciers. We produced a very polluting industry, and now we're impacted by mining. What did the meteorite impact produce? One of the greatest ore bodies on Earth, where most of the metals that we're discussing now for the e-economy exist. What did the glaciers produce? They produced the city of lakes that create the opportunities that natural systems provide. And now we have to rethink our forest industry. IKEA, or Sweden doesn't send out raw fiber and wood. They send out IKEA furniture. And we've got to start manufacturing in Northern Ontario and send out high quality products out of our industry. in the same way that the mining industry is now ready to not only recycle, but to produce the essential metals for the e-economy going forward. Just to show, if we start to think about the connectivity of systems, my own example of improving the land has so many downstream benefits. And here's some examples from the United Nations award-winning regreening program in Sudbury, where 4,000 volunteer kids and others have regreened the land. Or the industries have jumped in and developed technologies for remote treatment of land. But what we see downstream is enormous improvements in the water quality in lakes and streams, and the return to sensitive species now responding to the upstream benefits of land reclamation. Just a surprising one, as we face climate change, it won't solve all the problems, but there's always a battle over whether trees are enough to do the work of the climate challenge. But at least I'll give you a couple examples in Sudbury where trees are doing phenomenal things that we didn't think they could do. Yes, as Gary mentioned, the climate is warming in Sudbury. But as the community invested in growing trees and regreening those barren landscapes, we've reduced the surface winds in Sudbury Lakes by 35% by the drag on the land of forests. And the export from the forests of organic matter has changed the color and composition of lakes to the point, first, that the warming effect of winds don't penetrate to the bottom of the lakes. And the shading effects of the organic matter, I call it forest tea, protects the bottom waters. So strangely enough, today, 40 years after I started working in Sudbury, in spite of the climate warming, the average overall temperature of lakes is less in a treed community than in a barren community. And cold water species like the lake trout in the student's hand here are now able to return to downtown Sudbury, where they've been missing 50 years ago. No, of course, we can't sustain this if we allow that temperature to continue to rise. But for a time, investing in nature shows some immediate benefits. The argument in Canada and around the world is, should we plant 1 billion trees or 1 trillion trees? And just a reminder where carbon is actually stored in trees. Only 20% of it is stored in the living tree itself, and only stored there for the life of that tree. About 20% in a typical forest is lying in dry, dead wood. And I would argue that that wood should best be used in the construction industry rather than laying on the ground with 20%. The vast majority of the soil, the carbon, is stored in the soil beneath the forest, and the trees are constantly enriching the soil with carbon. And we're facing globally a tremendous soil crisis where soil is being degraded. So if we have to invest, we have to invest first in soil. So in an industrial landset, if soil is the foundation for a healthy ecosystem, can we repair this broken foundation that we've created here? And yes, there is technologies being developed. More is needed in treating soil with various industrial waste materials that are waste to one company, but essential to other companies. So for instance, paper sludge and wood ashes and human biosolids, sewage sludge, is of huge value in the restoring of vast amounts of damaged industrial land. And in time, creating biofuels growing on those. Featuring the understory of trees, for instance, the middle picture where the fellow's carrying bread baskets of plants. That is recycling the ground cover of the bypass, the new highway. And instead of just bulldozing that material, the understory plants that are so difficult to establish in mining areas are hand transported into damaged areas and allowed to enucleate that site. On the right-hand side, looks like snow today, but it's really lichens. And this is the direct and indirect effect of air quality. Lichens, as anyone sees growing on rocks, is the beginning of forest soil. And they can't grow in polluted air. So as Sudbury has cleaned up its air, the natural soil building process of lichens is now returning to the area, showing how nature can help if you first deal with the pollution source. There's no sense doing any of this work if you first don't reduce the pollution. There's no solution without the old idea of diluting pollution. Makes no sense anymore. We have to just stop pollution. But we have left the world with critical needs. There isn't enough land to support the human population, and it's then a terrible crisis to leave land in a degraded state. We can't make any progress in leaving vast areas of land in a degraded state. And in northeastern Ontario, we have about 20,000 hectares of land left in the form of abandoned and active aggregate pits. And as another speaker mentioned, an enormous problem of abandoned mine sites, and 5,000 abandoned mine sites where it's on the public purse to deal with. These can be converted into products like solar farms or used for growing biofuel crops better than wasteland. Forest products, we've mentioned cellulose, carbon credits, fiber, lumber, biomass energy, and plywood. But the new industry of building out of wood, permission is now being granted to build taller and taller buildings that are fireproof, 6 stories, 13 stories, but they need massive timber produced by cross-laminated timber. And the first cross-laminated timber plant in Ontario was developed in St. Thomas last year. Quebec has opened theirs. We need this type of modern manufacturing capabilities in northeastern Ontario. I'll just wrap up with some estimates. The city of Sudbury is doing a great job trying to get to their ultimate goal after they declared a climate emergency of being net zero in 2050. But with every business as usual modernization effort they can get, the 1.3 million tons of CO2 per year we can only make modest changes. Under the most strenuous efforts of the climate emergency, we might get to 30 or so % reduction. Trees are a solution, but there's no solution without the full elimination of fossil fuel use in a city like Sudbury by 2050. We have to aggressively become fuel-free in these next 30 years. Final one is acid mine drainage, the famous picture by Ed Bertinsky. You look at that as industrial waste and acid mine drainage. Another way to look at it is the fantastic opportunity that Aaron mentioned. This is really the work of, should actually be considered life in its bountiful state. These are ancient life forms, the sulfate reducing bacteria, looking for alternate energy sources in the form of iron and liberating copper and nickel and a multitude of other metals as a byproduct of their energy metabolism. If we stand on top of the Copper Cliff tailings, a massive tailings, one of the largest in North America, and now analyze it, there are $7.8 billion approximately of nickel left in that tailings. Could we build an engineered microbial industry that could harvest this and recycle this back into the economy? There's other fantastic things that the new biotech industries can also look for, and that is to go into the extreme environments of metal sites and look for hardy organisms like the algae that are best at producing biofuels, And this researcher is also finding very promising pharmaceuticals in the algae and other life forms that can survive in these extreme environments that might be very soon released as cancer drugs. And finally, ideas are amalgamating around in Northeastern Ontario around the idea of building a new industry related to these biotech solutions to the mine waste. So Dr. Nadia Mikachuk is currently working on a large proposal of building a Center for Mine Waste Biotechnology in Northeastern Ontario that can generate some of these products and some of these solutions in the mining area, and create incubators of education, training, and profitable industries. And they're at the early feasibility study now, and you can follow up with Nadia and where this industry is going to grow. So this is an image I'll finish with, and it's looking at Sudbury again from a different perspective of what will it be in the 2050. And the great global thinker and designer Bruce Mao, who is a product of Sudbury. Bruce works for all the big advertising companies of the world. He looks at Sudbury as the future is a resource management city within a park, that we build the park and live within a park and live with clean industries all at the same time. We see that mining, if done properly, can have footprints the size of a Walmart parking lot. We have to start producing our own food within in this landscape. There's no reason that we can't do sustainable forestry within a city. And similarly, running biomining and using reactors biological reactors to separate waste. And then we lost the rights to carbon storage credits, but it might come back that this area could be where other countries and other industries will want to invest in carbon credits. But carbon storage itself is a real important purpose for industrially damaged lands. So I thank you for the opportunity to speak to you and bring some of these ideas of what industrial city could look like in 2050.
Okay, Chmiigwech, John, much appreciated. Your lived experience always is a pleasure to listen to, and bringing back your respected research in these territories and across Canada. We trust that you will pass this knowledge along, and I know that as a professor with the university and as the research chair, your efforts are pinnacle in ensuring that our younger leaders have access to this knowledge so that they continue this fine work. So Chmiigwech, for your presentation today, much appreciated. I would now like to call upon Ana Belén Sanchez, who is joining all of us from Madrid, Spain. I would like to give her the floor. Anna is a Green Job Specialist from the United Nations International Labor Organizations, and she's going to provide some remarks on labor as it relates to the circular economy. So Chmiigwech, Anna, for your time. We're very honored and grateful that you can join us. As you stated earlier before the session opened, that you have quite a bit of snow in your territories this morning, as do we here in Northern Ontario. Not as much as we're used to having, but at least we can still celebrate these winter seasons. So I will pass the floor to you, and I look forward to hearing your presentation. Naha Miigwech.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for the invitation. And yeah, as you said, we are enjoying the snow at this part of the world. We are not used to that. So everything is a little bit unusual. Let's put it like that. So my presentation is going to present how is the relation between this issue of the circular economy and how this is related to green jobs that many of the previous speakers have referred to that, and this concept of just transition that at the ILO we have been working on and defending for a number of years already. So first of all, let me talk about the ILO. The ILO is the International Labour Organization. We are part of the United Nations system, but we are very unique because we are the only tripartite agency of the UN. What does it mean? That means that we, our constituents, as we call them, are governments, employers, and workers, and they, the three of them, work together to reach consensus. So all decisions and all of our work are based on social dialogue, which is when governments, employers, so the private sector workers, so the labor unions, work together and reach agreements. We have our main goal, which is establish labor standards at the global level, formulate policies and development programs to promote what we call decent work for all, for women, for men, for urban economies, for rural economies, for migrant population, for indigenous people, for absolutely everybody. So the main objectives of the ILO are, that's our definition of decent work: promote labor rights, promote decent work opportunities, improve social protection, because still many people in the world don't have any access to social security, to health services, for example, to pension, to unemployment benefits. In Latin America and the Caribbean, for you to have an idea, that it's about half of the working population. So half of them don't have any access to any of the areas that I have mentioned. And strengthen social dialogue. So this is about us, and now my presentation is gonna address this issue. I would like to explain a little bit how is the nature and the scale of the impacts of decent work and circular economy. So before going into a little bit more discussion about that, let me explain what is the definition of green jobs that we at the ILO gives. Green jobs, first of all, should be decent jobs. So this is particularly important for us because we can't expect that any job that is created in any of the environmental, I mean, as a result of any of the environmental policy that I'm gonna name now, can be called as green jobs. They need to be also decent jobs. Those are jobs which provide decent wages that allow workers to pay for themselves and for the families' needs, safe working conditions, so no accidents, no illness at work, social protection, again, pensions and employment benefits, health services, etc. Promote and respect social dialogue and workers' rights. This is very important because still in some countries of the world, there is no right, there is no right for workers' rights. So this is very important for the ILO. And those are the jobs that are created in let's say all sectors of the economy: agriculture, manufacturing, services. When we put in place this type of initiative, improve energy and raw material efficiency, which is very much related to circular economy, limit greenhouse gas emissions, very much linked to climate change, minimize waste and pollution, protect and restore ecosystems. This is about biodiversity protection, bioeconomy production, and things similar to those. Support adaptation to the effects of climate change and promote a circular economy. So when we put in place all these type of initiatives and there are new jobs that are created, those are what we call green jobs. And let me only remind some of the areas how jobs, labor, and environment are linked. So the environmental challenges of the world of work, how are relate each other. First of all, we can't forget that air pollution, that is particularly high in many of the cities of our continent, reduce productivity and working hours, as said, mainly in urban areas, but not only, produce chronic respiratory diseases, and as you know, there is a greater impact of getting COVID-19 in contaminated areas. So this is not only bad for employment, but also bad for our health, and of course, bad for environment. Climate change, there is a very strong link between heat stress and jobs. And according to the ILO estimations that my colleagues have undertaken a couple of years ago, there is this number, the equivalent of 72 million full-time jobs will be lost by 2030, so in almost 10 years' time, because of the higher temperature that climate change will bring us. If we talk about loss of biodiversity and damage to ecosystems, we have this number, 1.2 billion jobs that depend directly on ecosystem services. The previous speaker has talked about the forest services, and there are so many jobs in the world that depend on this particular ecosystem. But we can talk about fisheries, about tourism, about industry, pharmaceutical industry, for example, that depend on water and on biodiversity inputs, and all those depend directly on ecosystem services. And as you all know, biodiversity losses have a direct impact in all these jobs that depend on them. Natural disasters, something that is increasing at the global level. 23 million working life years have been lost to disasters in the year 2000, and the number unfortunately is growing. And something that is important to mention that might not be relevant for Canada, but it is very, very much relevant for Latin America and the Caribbean, is that informal employment, informality, acts as an obstacle to comply with environmental regulation. So in many countries of the world, workers don't have a contract, don't have a formal relation with their employer, and that is we have seen that this is an obstacle to compile to put in place the environmental regulations. So that was like an introduction about how the world of work and the environment is related, and let me now give you an introduction about how green economy, circular economy, climate change are related to this work in terms of positive and negative impacts. We have some positive impacts which are very, very important, and some of the previous speakers have already referred to them. By doing things good in terms of environment, there will be new jobs created, there will be new enterprises, innovation, new green products and services. We will have greener workplaces, as the case of hospitals that we have heard before, and our infrastructure will be more resilient, which is of course good for our value chain development. But we can't forget that climate change and policies to address climate change and the green economy will impact jobs as well. And there will be some sectors that need to be adapted, otherwise there will be job losses. And there will be, in some sectors, like for example, fossil fuel, job losses will be very important. There will be, of course, climate change, for example, have very important impact on productivity. There is, as already said, occupational health and safety impacts, and the conflicts over resources are growing all over the place. So what that means? That means that if we take a look to green economy, circular economy measures, that will involve changing methods of production across sectors. And this is very important for some of the sectors that have been already mentioned, like mining, like manufacturing, energy, transport, agriculture. All of them are gonna experiment many important impacts. Those impacts will impact the jobs that are created in those sectors. Okay, that's important for greenhouse gas emissions and for natural resources use, which is important for circular economy and biodiversity. We need measures. The required measures that are needed will change these industries profoundly. They need to adapt, they need to change, and those changes will bring many changes for jobs. And we are going to see now some numbers. So the ILO did some numbers. That's a report from a year. 1 year ago, we published it, and what we did was to see what could happen if the circular, if we have this scenario where the circular economy increase at an annual rate of 5%. So there will be 5% more plastics, glass, wood pulp, metals and minerals recycled. And those new recycling materials will replace the direct extraction of primary resources. We wanted to know what could happen at employment, and you can see the numbers at your left-hand side. And let me go on a little bit through that. There will be a very important job creation. 78 million new jobs will probably be created only with this 5% annual increase of recycling. But there will be as well the risk of job destruction for a high number of workers, 71 million jobs. What we know out of these numbers, we know that 49 million of those jobs will be easily reallocated. We will need some rescaling and upscaling programs to relocate within the same occupations in other industries. So we've had these 45 million jobs reallocated jobs, let's say. We will have 29 million new jobs that will need new training because will be new positions in new sectors and there will be the need of new knowledge about that. And there will be 22 million jobs that could be destroyed if workers are not reskilled and are able to get all these 29 new green jobs that will be created. So as you can see here, the impact for the world of work, it's immense, it's very, very high. And we have to understand well, and this is our point at the ILO, we need to understand well what are the expected impacts in our labor markets, otherwise it will be very difficult to address them. So here you have some numbers for sectors that will be mainly affected by the transition to a circular economy. You have the table at the left-hand side with the sectors that will grow. Everything related to recycling, reprocessing, and repair and reuse will be growth for sure. And you also have the numbers for those sectors where jobs will be lost. Everything related to mining, to manufacturing will probably be at risk. And at the right-hand side, you have also a summary of some sectors that will grow. We'll have renewable energies and waste that will grow probably, and some of the sectors that will be reduced for sure. I mean, that all will depend, of course, on the policies that are put in place at the country level, at the regional level, at the territorial level that we are talking about. I wanted to mention something related to gender because it is very important. You see here what's the percentage of women and men that will be affected by those changes that I have mentioned. You have the light green, which is smaller in both cases. That information referred to women workers, and the dark blue referred to men. So you see that there are more men right now working in sectors related to circular economy and than women, and there will be I mean this gender inequality, let's say, will be will keep happening by 2030. So we, of course, need to have policies to address that because otherwise we will have a green economy where we will have more men than women working, and with women with less opportunities to access to all those new jobs that can be created. So this is important for us. And then let me go to the main part of what the ILO does, which is this issue of just transition. We have to make sure that all the changes are not, are beneficial for most of workers. Let's put it like that. So we need to understand what is the nature and scale of impacts. So we need to measure, we need to diagnose, we need to assess how circular economy can affect labor markets. We need to identify what are the sectors that will be positively and negatively affected. And why we need that? Because we need all decisions to be taken by social dialogue with workers, with employers, with governments, and with other stakeholders on the table. We can't leave anyone behind. Once we have this information, we have to go to social consensus, engagement with communities and local actors, of course, and tripartite social dialogue. And finally, once we have information and dialogue, we could come up with policies and measures that will make sure that social justice is the base of the transition. So we have to put in place both policies to maximize opportunities and policies to minimize and avoid, to minimize negative impacts. It is a little bit maybe confusing slide, sorry about that, but this is our main framework for the ILO. This is what we call the ILO guidelines for just transition. And those guidelines have these 4 pillars. One is for macro policies, industrial and sector policies included. The other one is for employment policies related to enterprises, to skills, and to labor markets. The third pillar is about protection, social protection and occupational health and safety, to make sure that jobs are also safe jobs, not only green, but also safe. And then we have the fourth pillar, which is about rights and social dialogue. We need rights at work, and we, as I said, we need dialogue to be very much participatory. And this is one of my final slides, skills. This is, I have already mentioned that, but let me come back again to that, because this is one of the main areas of a just transition policy. We need to make sure that workers have the right skills that are needed for a circular economy. And as you can see, the blue ones, the blue numbers, refer to a scenario of a greater circular economy. And most of them are part of the medium skilled occupations. So that means that we will, the labor markets will need short to longer upskilling and reskilling programs. Technical and vocational education and training courses will be required. There will be some jobs in the high skill occupation and low skill occupation as well, but most of them will be in the medium skill occupation. So we need to put in place programs that to provide training and certification for all these new positions that will be created. And just to finalize, this is a summary of the countries with Just Transition Initiative. Many of them are related to energy, because the energy transition is something that is happening already. And in Europe, there are many, and the number of countries is growing: Spain, France, Germany, Netherlands, Scotland, in the UK, Czech Republic, Norway, and some others. The Americans, the number is growing very fast as well. Climate change normally is the focus. Costa Rica, Chile, Argentina, Colombia, Canada, that already has a Just Transition Committee to address coal mining impact. In Asia and Oceania, New Zealand, Austria, Philippines, China as well. And in Africa, South Africa, Ivory Coast, Ghana, Nigeria, Senegal, and also there is a strong focus on climate change in Africa and green jobs creation around climate change impacts. Sorry, I said that was my final idea, my final slide, but that's the one. Some final ideas. Promoting circular economy is good for the environment and good for jobs. This is the big summary of my presentation. We can't forget that. It's good for both, but that will, a circular economy will create many changes in labor markets, and we need to identify them. What are impacts in economic sectors and within labor markets in order to put in place those policies that are needed. A just transition approach is needed to ensure that no one is left behind. So social justice will be the basis of the change that will bring environment and social benefits. And how? Assessing new skills, implementing green jobs skill programs, supporting the business community, particularly small and medium enterprises. We need capacity building program for those companies that many times don't have a very clear idea about what circular economy is, what green economy is, etc. Promoting local and regional circular economy value chains are very interesting, because that will create local green jobs, and those local green jobs will exist at the local level, whatever happens. So it can be sent to another country. And very importantly, we need social dialogue among workers and the representatives, the labor unions and the employers' organization, together with governments to reach consensus and agreements. And yeah, thanks for your attention. And let me stop sharing my screen.
Great. Thank you very much. Muchas gracias, Ana. It's a very interesting presentation. And I'm glad that we highlighted some key points there. And I was glad that in our agenda that we ended with this topic, which is a focus on labor and work, because I think it's an important piece of this whole, this problematic that we're faced with. And we've had the pleasure of and privilege of having the great panelists share their work, share the experience that they've accumulated over the years in different perspectives, whether it be from Aaron's work on looking at the macro view of national policies and the need for looking at a broad perspective on how the circular economy applies to various aspects of the natural resource sector. Dr. Boda's work with patients and the stories that he's told about the successes and the challenges that we face with embracing the circular economy and the threat and impacts of climate change, as well as the opportunities that are presented. Peter and his team at Glencore, an excellent presentation of the ground level work that is occurring and the innovation in the mining sector and with the operations, various aspects of Glencore's operation. Dr. John Gunn and his team at Laurentian University. Innovation takes work and it takes effort. And lastly, Ana Belén Sanchez with the work of understanding the global labor economy and the transitions. And so it's this transition of work is not just about shifting people from one vocation to another, but we have to ensure that what the dynamics of this transition will be, and to ensure that it's a green and just transition. So the whole notion of work is what we want to talk about next. And in Canada, we are a nation of work, a nation of workers who have forged a nation out of a very rough place and a big place. So we're used to this, and I believe we're ready for the challenge in all the different sectors. We have participants from the Alberta oil and gas sector on this call as well, in this symposium. So it's not just about Northern Ontario, though this is our focus. But as a prof, I always say to my students, I said one of the joys actually of my job is to help people find their purpose, their vocation and their work. And there's no greater joy than finding what your meaning is. And often that's executed through work, whether it be in your community, with your family, or in your professional activities. So I would like to now introduce Charles Sirtwell to talk a bit more about that, to give some concluding remarks, and also talk about the work that we need to do next to take some of the ideas we've heard about today into a further step in reality in Northern Ontario. So I'd like to pass the floor to Charles. Charles, the floor is yours.
Thank you, David. First, I just want to highlight that I recognize where the tech delays early on have us 30 minutes running long, so I just wanted to apologize for that. I know everybody's eager to get to the question period, so I will try to be brief. But of course, we want to give you a sense of the next steps in this project. First off, I want to say that Northern Policy Institute is very pleased to partner with Design Environment as the host for today's event. And in particular, I wanted to offer my personal thanks to our speakers, panelists, and to our moderators, Angela and David. I also want to thank Angela for recognizing and acknowledging at the beginning that the numerous nations and traditional territories encompassed by what we now call Northern Ontario. Keeping this complete history and diversity of thought and perspective in mind is going to be key to finding our best future together. I would also be remiss if I didn't offer MPI's thanks to our generous sponsor, Glencore, who's made many of this technology possible and will also help us distribute the recordings and the transcripts of these talks to people who weren't able to join us today. Of course, for those of you who don't necessarily know us, NPI is Northern Ontario's think tank. We pursue evidence-based solutions for and from the regions of Northern Ontario. That fact that Northern Ontario is not a single region, but a loose agglomeration of many regions is an important one in considering the next steps for this project. In fact, as I like to point out to those who reside in Toronto and elsewhere, most of us in Northern Ontario are not particularly north either, a point we try to bring home by emphasizing that our community includes, in addition to Northern Ontario, all of Western Ontario and most of Central Ontario as well. MPI and Design Environment have committed to moving forward with a joint project to reinforce the foundations for a circular economy in all of these regions of Northern Ontario. Now, our first step, of course, is to identify the existing projects that are already contributing to a nascent circular economy in our regions. It's not like this is a brand new idea, nor is it like anybody in Northern Ontario is not already working on the issues. And so I would encourage all of you who are involved in or know about these types of projects to reach out to MPI's research manager, Rachel Rizzuto. You can find her email on our website at northernpolicy.com. I'll say her name again, it's Rachel. If you can't find her, you can always find me. And if you can't find me, you can always write info@northernpolicy.ca. After that, in addition to collecting information about the ongoing projects and where everybody is on the circular economy, we'll be working to develop a shared vision for a circular economy for Northern Ontario. Design Economics has agreed to lead that effort, and we plan to launch our community outreach in February with the goal of having a preliminary vision to share with our regions by late May. So those of you who don't know David already are going to get to know him fairly well over the coming months as we move forward with that initiative. While that's going on, the MPI, of course, will be working on a matching matrix to help bring together those with product that they currently see as waste with those who could use that product or could use similar products as an input. We hope to have that up and running by the fall of 2021. NPI has a history of building relationships between entities, organizations, and individuals who will benefit from those exchanges. And so we look forward to bringing that to bear in the circular economy. My screen is flashing with about 17 messages telling me that our website's actually northernpolicy.ca, so I'll pause for a second and highlight that. Someone should have caught that in my notes, including me who wrote them. In any event, moving beyond the matching exercise, we're also going to be looking for ideas to assist small businesses to participate in the circular economy. You know, we've heard from many large companies that are often the first to enter into these kind of initiatives because, of course, they have the capacity in-house to explore alternatives and the scale to justify experimentation and, frankly, the funds to drive innovation. Small businesses, especially during a crisis like the one we are now in, are often exclusively focused just on surviving today and tomorrow, and not necessarily being able to think fully about next month, next year, or even the next decade. Design Environment and MPI will also be exploring crowdsource ways to inform and secure the buy-in of all of the population of regions we serve. With their buy-in, we hope will bring a larger pool of ideas to the table to move the circular economy forward, tying local sources to local needs or regional ones. As we just heard from our friends at ILO, these concepts of local jobs, local connectivity, these are important to sustaining and growing the circular economy going forward and maximizing the benefits for small communities in rural and remote areas in particular, which is the reality for much of Northern Ontario. Now, while that project is proceeding, we will, of course, be building our next event in the Symposium series, this one to be hosted in the Northwest. And I say in the Northwest because I suspect we'll still be online at that point. But of course, this one's hosted in the Northeast by, among others, our event champion, our good friend, Mark Saray. Our target for the next event is to hold that in early June. Topics being considered include things like tourism, forestry, agriculture, municipalities, and of course, that's small business innovation focus. And let's not forget the potential for education, post-secondary and K-12. I suspect if we saw some of the measures like we saw for the health sector in terms of the GHG impact and other environmental impacts, there's lots of room in the post-secondary and K-12 to see similar kind of transformations. Again, we would love to hear your ideas and suggestions about potential speakers. And again, just send those along to me, to Rachel, to David, whoever you are most comfortable contacting. As a final comment, I want to offer a well-earned note of thanks to MP Mark Saray, who generously agreed to be the champion for this event. In fact, he drove us so hard that I think David and I are going to sleep for the next couple of weeks. As a nonpartisan organization, our goal now is to find a champion from across the aisle for our next event in June. And given the level of passion and enthusiasm that Mark has brought to his role as event champion for this time around, that may well be our biggest challenge. In closing, I want to thank everybody for attending this event And we look forward to working with you to move the project forward in the weeks and months ahead. Thanks, and looking forward to the question time.
Okay, Chmigwech, Charles, I'm going to pass it over to David. So both David and I will now try and navigate through the chat boxes, some of the Q&A from the participants. So David, do you want to give it a go? I think there was a couple of questions. I think one of the first ones was regards to, the question is for Senora Sanchez regarding if there is a possibility for an exchange program of some type with opportunities for Latin Americans to join Northern Ontario and to contribute to our circular economy, or if we already have articulation agreements in place with any of our communities and or organizations. Does that summarize that question, David?
Yep, I think it does. I'm not sure who the most appropriate person would be for that response. Do any of the panelists want to chime in on that?
Do you want me to give it a try?
Yes,
Sure.
absolutely.
Good. So, I mean, in relation to what extent Latin Americans can go to Canada and to contribute to circular economy, of course, the potential is there, of course, because the needs there are many opportunities to create new green jobs in Canada for a circular economy. Each country have different agreements in terms of migration with the different countries. So Latin America is a big subcontinent, so you need to go one country by country to see what are the needs for whoever is working in Chile, Colombia, Mexico, or Uruguay, or in the Caribbean, to go to Canada and work on that. As far as I know, so this is one thing. Second thing, as far as I know, there is not an agreement yet on how to promote this type of migration where we want green workers, green jobs workers, no, to go there and get a position. But there is the opportunity to do it because, as I said, in this type of agreements, there is always some, a section about skills and capacity and things like that. So that could be a very good, very nice, and very progressive type of agreement between Latin America, some Latin American countries, and Canada.
Thank you, Anna. Angela, one of the questions I'm seeing here is one from Laura Filistan. This is the one in the chat box that refers to the importance of product design in the transition to a circular economy. Shall we field that one? So the question is from Laura Filistan. Could the panelists speak to the importance of product design in the transition to a circular economy in regard to anticipating the future use of our products' biological and technical inputs so that materials can be safely and sustainably reused in future products? So kind of a life cycle assessment type of question. It seems to me that might be a question for either Peter from Glencore, perhaps John Gunn from Laurentian, or even Dr. Gary Boda. You mentioned some aspects of that within the medical space. So whomever is keen to respond, please let us know.
Okay, I could give it a quick discussion. I mean, certainly when you think about things like plastics, certainly the original design intent is precisely why they're difficult to deal with now. But I guess to give an example, the item we deal with, and you got to understand it's quite a dynamic situation, as you know, some innovators trying to develop, for example, a battery and working through different chemistries depending on what attributes they want from capacity or longevity or power or whatnot. And of course, through that process, you know, a final recipe is developed, and then you go to the marketplace to see where you can source those, and then you know that brings upon the light of where you have to go and source these materials, mine these materials, and then you know at the back end somebody has to think about, once they make a commercial product, you know, what are you going to do with it at the end of the life cycle? And so that's what we see happening now. I mean, in the auto space, going to battery electric vehicles, nobody wants to see a pile of batteries, you know, at the landfill. And of course, that's why the collaborations are happening between the auto manufacturers and mining companies to try to recycle and put back into the marketplace. I guess the question is ultimately, how much of that can you do ahead of time is probably the essence of the question, and it's a very good point. But I guess I'm just trying to draw attention to the fact that how innovation evolves sometimes is not a straight line, and but I think we figure out in the marketplace where we have our place to play. We end up now being a consumer of battery electric equipment and the final end recycler, or the producer of the materials and the final end recycler, perhaps. So that's the result, but it does take time and takes a lot of input and stakeholders. So.
I might, David, just draw attention to the McEwen Architecture School that's opened in Northern Ontario, the first in 40 years to have an architecture school built in Ontario. And they have very much this philosophy of working with Indigenous design and focus, and also designing with wood. And I think there'll be lots of creative potential to work with the architecture school students. I asked people to look at the recent international competition they just held called Sudbury 2050, and extremely creative design ideas for the future, and reusing of material was a big focus of that.
Great, thank you. Aaron, thanks John, that's interesting points, interesting competition. Aaron, you had mentioned you had some ideas. Aaron, do you want to chime in?
Yeah, really quickly. We've been actually on this issue quite a bit, and I think that as it pertains to the circular economy for plastics, I think that the product design is really a key component. But one thing that we're hearing from the business community on this that is a bit of a challenge is that some businesses can be incredibly innovative. They can increase the costs in terms of producing a biodegradable or a product made with recycled plastic, but we need sort of policy certainty that unique design is actually going to be able to be processed by waste facilities in the region. And so from that end, I think part of product design is also good policy design. And so, we are kind of hoping that we'll see more federal leadership on sort of moving towards harmonized standards for plastic products, so that those waste facility investments can be made, and that innovators can have some certainty that there will actually be a feedback loop to recover their products.
Okay, miigwech for that, Aaron. Thank you so much. I'm going to flip really quickly, David, to Gord's question. And for Gord, with regards, first of all, congratulations on the startup of your own business. I would like to recommend that you provide your contact information in the chat box, and MP Mark Sierra and his team will get in contact with you directly to identify the different supports that they will offer when it comes to starting up a small business. So miigwech for your question, Gord. Perhaps we can move on to Stacey Wright, David, with regards to council member. She's a council member with Kirkland Lake, recognizing the importance of the circular economy to our shared future, and what role do we see municipality governments playing to support the endeavors in the forestry and mining sectors. I believe every one of these panelists can speak to supporting that municipal government has to play a critical role in leading by example on what circular economy looks like in the geographies that you're representing. But if there's anybody that's on the call that would like to speak to that, that would be great. But I believe that that would be the duty and responsibility as elected officials to ensure that, you know, we're providing sustainable environments and respecting what community development looks like. So if there's any of our panelists that would like to add to that, I'll give it a couple of seconds. And if not, I'll pass it back to David and we can go to the next question.
Comments, anybody?
So am I allowed to jump in, David?
I was going to call on you, Charles, but thank you for volunteering.
My apologies, Charles.
So Stacey, sorry, go ahead, David.
I had this feeling that your thought was, I had this mental telepathy going. I feel Charles coming. So go ahead. What was yours?
So thanks for this question, Stacey. I think that that John actually in his talk about the increasing desire to see construction with wood and changing municipal policies around wood construction and those types of things are exactly the places where municipalities can kind of participate in supporting the endeavors of the forestry and mining sectors. I think we're talking about some of the flexibility around reusing products and accessing services. I think municipal bylaws and those types of things have an impact, as do working closely with forestry and mining and other sectors, quite honestly, in terms of the recognizing the long-term life cycles of these projects. I think municipalities in Northern Ontario have advantages that we should play on, in that we've been dealing with these kind of industries and these kind of time horizons for quite some time now. And so that gives us a leg up from communities that might be a little bit more urban centric or a little farther away from that reality. And I think that playing to your strengths along those existing partnerships and recognizing that it's multiple administration timeframes is really a way to go ahead. But certainly I think the biggest area is in encouraging, supporting, and allowing, quite frankly, the use of these recycled materials and materials that have a longer life cycle in municipal projects.
Excellent points, Charles. Do anybody else, any of the other panelists have comments on that question? We're good. Okay, Angela, shall we take the next question? I've got one that we see in the chat box from Taylor Coel. Shall we field that question?
Yes, absolutely. David, the floor is yours if you want to lead this one.
Sure. So we have a question from Taylor Coel to the panelists. The question is, regarding natural resource management, do any panelists have connections to forestry? Forestry can be significantly enhanced through management techniques, partnering with research to inoculate proper mycorrhizae into seedlings to help forests grow much faster, considering the increased demand on timber products as we shift away from plastics. This could help make green jobs and increase supply. One green idea to consider. I think, I mean, John perhaps may have some insights on that from their research. Any comments from the panelists on this question? Excellent question. Thank you very much, Taylor.
I'll just speak on behalf of my colleague, Nate Basilico, is that they have a very effective consortium of the pulp and paper and fiber people that are very creative and supportive of both students and innovations. And I think the fact that they're working across the industry so effectively together speaks to their willingness to invest in these sorts of new innovations. So I think there's lots of opportunities happening in that. They have such a huge challenge of what to do with their vast amounts of waste that they're looking for all kinds of new industries to absorb that waste for them.
Thank you, John. I know there's a ton of interesting work going on with your team. Certainly in BC, where I'm partially based, mostly based, there's a great amount of work going on EBC and the forestry group there, and in the industry in that area, and has been for quite some time. So yeah, it's
well-established partners.
Very, very good work going on. Other questions? Are there any questions for the panelists?
I think there was one question that we missed, David, from Adam Riley with regards to breaking down what needs to be put in place, whether it be from industry or government partners to support a circular economy in Northern Ontario. So I would love to, pass that over, and perhaps that again is a question for Charles. But if the other panelists have comments, we'll open the floor there.
Thank you, Angela.
See, I wasn't expecting you to come back to me, so I turned everything off. I think you've heard many of the things that need to be put in place with the various speakers today, and I think you'll hear some more again at the next event around sectors like forestry and agriculture, which we consciously chose to kind of put at the next event. But things like information sharing, I think understanding the regulatory barriers to kind of participate. You heard some talk about the impacts that actually doing the right thing sometimes results in negative economic sanctions for recycling and other issues in the mining sector, which seems kind of counterintuitive to me. And so we should be looking seriously at where we're finding regulations that restrict those kind of green-oriented opportunities. I think the other area that needs a lot of work is we still have a public debate that largely kind of pits this as an either-or exercise, environment versus jobs. And I think that again, our friends from the UN did a very good job of highlighting that this isn't a competition at all, but there's still a lot of work around getting both business people and their workers and the general community at large to understand that this is a huge economic opportunity for areas like Northern Ontario. And so in addition to taking a serious look at our regulatory environment, taking a serious look at how well we're doing in terms of communicating with each other about what exactly are the waste products that we can offer to others, there's still a lot of that public engagement and public education that has to happen. So that's what I've got in terms of that summary, David.
Excellent.
Sorry, Angela, David's on my screen. So
It's all good, Charles. Thank you so much for your feedback there. And again, for all of the participants, I just want to remind you, all of your questions are in the chat boxes. They are being recorded, and we will filter them out to the panelists. We would also like to remind you, if you could put your contact information so that we can provide feedback directly to your questions that have been identified through our event here this morning and now into the afternoon. But we'll go back to David, and I believe there's a Michael that has a direct question around the other economic C word. So David, I'll pass this over to you to lead this question.
Okay, thank you, Angela. So the question from Michael is a good question. This is one of those fundamental questions. Can we address the other economic C word, capitalism, and ask if panelists think that we need to address the basics of the way we organize our society and the unequal consumption and hoarding of global resources? Important example of NHS able to address emissions while the US health system was worst overall in terms of greenhouse gas emissions. So this is one of those fundamental questions. And in fact, I'm actually gonna, if you don't mind, Angela, I'd like to get your perspective on this to start with, because I know this is one of those, and in our brief chats that we've had already, I think you have a fundamental philosophical outlook on this that I'd like, if you're okay with sharing your response to this question, we could all benefit from hearing it.
Absolutely. Well, miigwech, Michael. So as I stated earlier in our opening comments around the original peoples in these territories that you now call Northern Ontario, or what you now call Canada, there is a vast inequity when it comes to the original peoples that have been the custodians of these lands for time immemorial. So if we're going to talk about capitalism, we also have to talk about colonialism and colonial policy with the Crown and the relationship with the original people of the territory that had a very different understanding and respect for our lands and our territories. We also know that with evolution, you know, this is the space that we're in now, and we certainly would not want to go back in living in the harsh conditions that we once did. But the fact of the matter is that there's still a vast inequity when it comes to land resource sharing and relationship building with the original peoples, whether it's through forestry, mining, but the Industrial Revolution itself has had an extreme toll, not just on equity of the original peoples of the territories and what you now call Canada, but the disparities in, I've heard the language social determinants of health, but there's Indigenous determinants of health. And in our communities, we still don't have access to clean water. We don't have access to healthcare, and we don't have access to employment opportunities that most settlers would have the privilege in accessing these various elements. So if we're going to go into those conversations, specifically in Northern Ontario, actually not specific to Northern Ontario, in fact, in all of what you call Turtle Island, and that's North America, and I know that Anna could speak to the same in relations to South America with the original descendants in those territorial lands, that there is always going to be a discrepancy. And we collectively, if you're going to talk about circular economy, those are the hard truths that have to be addressed. And we all need to take action, and we need to stop the systemic racism when it comes to Indigenous peoples in these territories and provide the same opportunity. But first, let's focus on even the simplest things like clean water. So I could go on and on and on about this, but I trust that the partners and the panelists that have been invited to speak today have already done their due diligence in establishing those relationships and inviting and providing opportunity. I know that that Peter has had several opportunities working, and so has John, in fact, working with the original peoples in these territories of Robinson-Huron Treaty and developing impact benefit agreements that will provide sustainability within the current First Nation setups. But it really needs to go back to the actual treaties, and for all of us to put some of those teachings that you have, let's say, embraced under Western education, you need to unlearn that and have an open mind and a willingness to understand that there's far more truths in the true history of what you now call Canada, and providing a space for Indigenous populations to have that same access and the same respect, and really unlearning that systemic racism has no place here in what you now call Canada. So thank you, David, for allowing me to share my thoughts on that. And I'm open to questions there as well. But I also know that we're out of time, and or we're getting close to being out of time. So I'll pass the floor back to David. Nahamigwech.
Thank you, Angela. And one of the things I alluded to at the opening of the questions was the notion of work, and how the development of what we now call Canada was an effort of work, but it's also an effort of work to recognize the clear problems that we've had in the history of the development of what we now call Canada, and the work that is required now for us to move forward with nation-to-nation relationships with First Nations. It's work that needs to be done, and it is work in front of us, and it will require commitment, cooperation, consideration, and so forth. There's a lot of issues we need to consider. I'd like to actually, if we've yet to hear from Gary, Dr. Gary Boda, in the questions, and I think he would have some interesting insights, particularly from the health standpoint that was alluded to in this last question. Dr. Boda, do you have any comments on this point? I know we have chatted before about this notion of the donut economy and some different new paradigms under which we need to reconceive what capitalism is, part of which is human health, social and social capital and human capital. Would you like to offer some of your insights on this?
Sure. I think what COVID has really shown us is just how it affects different populations differently. And it's very interesting when you look at COVID, because now there's a strong linkage between particulate pollution, the 2.5 micron particles, and COVID. So those that are exposed to higher pollution levels, be they inner city or whatever, are the ones that are getting sicker and dying. There was and this is a good marker for Canada, there was a fairly recent UNICEF, World Health Organization, and Lancet report that ranked Canada 170th out of 180 countries in terms of sustainability, making us one of the wealthy countries that threatens, as they say, every child's future through climate change. So we've got a long way to go. We've got this is a great kind of conference to have, to sort of put in perspective, where are we, where do we have to go? Because again, climate change, which ties into circularity, is really an issue of social justice. It's affecting children more, it's affecting women more, it's affecting our Indigenous more. Those segments of society are the ones most affected by this. So we've got to get this circular economy going, and going in the right direction. So I'll leave it there.
Excellent. Thank you, Dr. Yaboda. Absolutely. I mean, it's the notion that Ana Belén Sanchez was referring to, which is, and COVID has amplified these inequities and inequalities that we're seeing in our societies. And I think hammering home, I mean, my office in Vancouver is downtown Vancouver, and there's no greater demonstration of that amplification of inequality in a very small geographic space than downtown Vancouver. One of the greatest, most extreme examples, I believe, in Canada. So we need to ensure that there's a just transition as well as a green transition as we explore our next steps. As Angela has stated, we are running short on time. We do have other questions. Angela, what do we have a cutoff time for when we will conclude and go to the media questions, or how many more questions can we field? Perhaps maybe the organizer.
Yeah, let's do one more question. And again, just a reminder to the participants that you provide your email contact information in order for the panelists to review your questions and provide feedback after the event is concluded. So I think, David, we were at I'm trying to look now, scrolling here. Was it Taylor?
There was one below the C, capitalism one, which is Patrick Snyder.
Absolutely. So go to that one, David, and then we'll close from there. And there's exactly like wonderful questions. So we don't want anybody to feel that they're not going to go unanswered, and trust that the planning committee, along with the expertise on the panels, will be in touch and provide some ample feedback for your reference. So go ahead, David.
Okay, so this will be our last question from Patrick Snader, I believe. Pardon my pronunciation. And the question is, thank you all, quote unquote, thank you all, wonderful presentations and event. Question: seeing as the innovation and integration of ideal systems and more open material flow within cities accelerates the circularity and bioregional sustainability quotient in any city, and a zero waste policy requires more access to the municipal waste streams, are there any existing programs, initiatives in place at any major Northern Ontario municipalities to enhance and increase the public's access to the municipal material, quote unquote, waste flows? That is a great question, very specific. So I'll open that up to the panelists and Charles as well. If any insights on this specific question?
There's Gary. Thank
Okay.
God.
I was just going to say very quickly, it's not taking place here, but as you can imagine, in hospitals, we use a lot of plastic and polyvinyl chloride materials, IV bags, masks, all that gets disposed now. And there are a couple of projects taking place, I know in Southern Ontario, looking at recycling the PVCs that are being used in the health sector. So it'd be great to get this kind of pilot project up and going here, but we do know, because we do know it exists, but at this point it's not happening yet.
Charles, perhaps you might have some comments. This does actually relate to some of the things we've been talking about.
So again, our hope is that that we'll be able to have a municipal group speaking at the next event to kind of highlight existing programs along this line. What I can say is that from my perspective as a policy expert in the North, I'm not actually aware of any major programs in any of our 5 or 6 biggest communities around access to waste generated by municipalities themselves. I know that there's some creative pilots around using some of the waste for organic activities around replanting and those types of things. And I did yesterday learn of an interesting partnership that the Nishnawbe Oskee Nation has going around recycling and composting among their communities. So interestingly enough, or perhaps not so surprising, I guess, is that it might not actually be the larger communities that are leading this charge in Northern Ontario. It's actually the communities that, as Angela has highlighted quite appropriately, have a much richer and longer tradition of being connected to this circular type of approach. And so it's interesting. I think it's a question for this project going forward. How many more of those kind of examples can we draw from the longstanding First Nations that are here in our community and continuing to adjust and live in a new reality that sees additional economic opportunities? So quick answer is, don't have a list for big cities, but I've already heard very interesting examples for some of our smaller communities. And I think we're going to discover there's a lot going on that many of us are not necessarily aware of. And I'm glad that Angela's nodding.
Yes. Well stated, my friend. So going back to David, I think this brings us to the end of our participant Q&A period. And I think it's our duty now to open up the floor for media. Is that correct, David?
I believe that is the case. And I will call to Kaylee and Jordan. I believe that's our next step. And if so, we will open it up to media. Just a note to the media organizations, if you could please let us know who you are and the organization that you represent when you pose the questions. That would be much appreciated.
Yes, and before we jump to media, on behalf of David and myself, I want to thank all of the participants again with our opening comments. The greatest gift that one can give is the gift of time, and we're very honored and grateful that you've given us your gift of time to participate, to hear the expertise of our panel, and to ask some critical questions, but more importantly, to be active and committed to moving forward with what circular economy looks like in Northern Ontario, and trust that the team with both Charles and Mark, we will provide the responses to the questions, but more importantly for Charles and team, put some action into the next steps that we need to navigate moving forward. So Chmigwech, and I'll pass it back over to David for the media.
Thank you very much, Angela. Yes, so we are now at the point where we are inviting the media to provide questions. And there's a question about the availability of this video. This will be available after it's being recorded, so no worries about that. And if you have others that couldn't attend that you would like to share some of the knowledge that was shared here, then by all means you can share the video link once it is up. So media, do we have any media organizations that are present that would like to ask a question? And I believe they will get a video presentation to pose their question. Mark, do we know which media organizations we have present? One media.
Yeah, David, Kaylee mentioned there was three media outlets, but some of them just took the information and have been corresponding directly with Jordan and Kaylee. So I think we'll be sending out a press release shortly. And to kind of wrap up the events here, so we might be good.
Yeah, I think that what I'm seeing, Mark, is that we had a couple of media attend early. They got their quotes. They'll be fine. I suspect that if they require anything else, they'll be in direct contact with us. So I think, David and Angela, at this point, you're cool to go ahead with one last sincere thank you to our panelists, both for giving such wonderful speeches and for being willing to hang in there while we dealt with the adventures at the beginning, and being willing to hang on while we waited to see if there was any media questions at the end.
Absolutely, David. I'll pass the floor to you for Thanksgiving for the exceptional leadership with our panelists. So the floor is yours for closing comments, and perhaps Mark would like to share a few words before we sign off as well. Miigwech.
Thank you, Angela. I will make this brief because you've heard probably too much from me during this as not even a panelist, just a moderator, but I do really want to express my sincere thanks to each of the panelists, also from taking the time beforehand to have a conversation about how we were going to approach this. I think it's important. For me, it was just great to get to know you a bit and share some insights and have a bit of a conversation to make sure we're all working together. But on behalf of the organizing team, as well as all the attendees, I've had numerous messages on my phone from people I personally invited from across the country and in fact across the world to attend, commenting on how much they've enjoyed the interventions from all of the groups, all the panelists, but as also from the youth and the organizers as well. So really thank you very much, all of you, for participating. Aaron, Gary, Peter, John, Anna, I mean, really great job. Excellent. Thank you for keeping on time as well. And we appreciate your input, and we hope that we can involve you in next steps as we go forward. I know you're heavily invested in this work, so my door is always open. You have my email, and we really thank you for taking the time and the effort to participate and share what you're doing. And I see nothing but opportunity and challenges going forward, but by working together, I think we can certainly make great wins for Northern Ontario. Back to you, Angela.
David, it was an honor working alongside you for this event, and I just want to thank Mark and Charles for the opportunity to have me join you for this. I felt a very successful event, and I would like to thank again the panelists for your expertise, your wisdom, your lived experience, and most of all, your passion and commitment to our future generations. I'll pass it over to Mark for closing comments, and I think at that point, we'll be ready to exit the call. So miigwech to everybody. I look forward to the next steps and again, continued our shared responsibility.
Well, I'm not going to repeat anything that David and Angela just said. I'm going to just first off thank David and Angela for your insights. So thank you so much. And obviously Charles, Northern Policy Institute, and your team for all the work. But the message here is clear. Keep pushing elected officials. Keep, we got to listen to the experts. Keep advocating, get your municipal councillors involved, get your mayors involved, your MPP, your MPs. We got to continue hearing from you so that we could bring various policies and dollars appropriately to look at reshaping our economy. This is a great start when we look at the 5 panelists, and Charles indicated moving forward with future panelists, future sectors. But I just want to say government does make a difference. We have to hear at the grass level, and we have to make changes and move forward. So I just want a big thank you to everyone. This has been a very, very knowledgeable few hours, and really look forward to really making sure that Northern Ontario, we creating jobs and moving forward with the economy. So thank you very much, everyone. Merci beaucoup. Miigwech. This has been great.
Take care, everybody.